Good morning, Craig.
Good morning, Josiah.
How are you doing?
Very well.
Good. Thanks for doing this. To give you a little bit of background or the format of this, it's give an opportunity to give an oral biography of your life. And so I like to just start at the beginning and then kind of work your way through the decades. And I know you had a few different careers, so however much you're willing to share would be interesting. You know, when I met you at the gym, we talked about some of your injuries, and so maybe we'll get into that and your recovery process. But yeah, if you can just start from the beginning, who you are, and let's start at childhood, and we'll
Okay.
go from there.
Well, my name is Craig Christensen, and I was born in Oregon, and my parents moved to Idaho, and I grew up in eastern Idaho. Farming community.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the money that came out of that region were for farmers.
What did you guys farm?
I didn't farm. My father worked as an auto body repairman.
Oh, okay.
He worked for a Ford Mercury Lincoln dealer. And I kind of grew up in the car business.
Mm.
And I became a very kind of a car aficionado, learning how to paint and do minor body work.
Did you go to the shop with him then?
Usually after school, I did. He started me off sorting bolts, nuts and bolts. And it was kind of a boring job, but he would collect nuts and bolts and he would keep them in a bin. But my earliest recollection with him was sorting those nuts and bolts into different boxes. And I never really understood why, but it taught me how to recognize the size of a bolt and the size of a nut and the threads and all that stuff. So I really learned a lot by doing that.
Pay attention to details.
Yeah. But most of the things he had me doing was repairing fiberglass stuff, because he hated fiberglass because it itched. But in that area in the wintertime, the farmers had nothing to do, and they would buy snowmobiles, and they'd go out and run around these snowmobiles, and usually they would wreck them, and the tops of the snowmobiles was fiberglass. So they'd bring those in, and I did all the fiberglass repair and then the paint.
This is at his shop?
At his shop.
They would let a child come in and work?
Yeah.
It was a normal thing back then?
I was in high school.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't a child.
Yeah.
I was in high school. So I did that and kind of learned to do that. When I went to high school, because my father had a auto body business, and I kind of thought that maybe I'd go into that line of work, I didn't take high school very seriously.
Mm.
And there was really no encouragement to excel academically in my family. It was a working class family, and I never really felt like I was college material because I was never encouraged to do that. So high school was a kind of a social outlet for me, more so than an academic learning experience.
Mm. Did you ever get into the bad crowd or the wrong crowd, or
No.
was that even a really big thing back then? Were you?
Well, in my hometown, being small, there was really no bad. Everybody was good.
Mm-hmm.
All my friends were good. Everybody was good. I was in the band, and then the band was, most of the popular people were in the band, and I was kind of a cut up comic guy, so I was well liked.
Were you into sports in high school?
I was into sports. I played football until I dislocated my shoulder.
Start of your injuries?
The start of my injuries, and I'm a little reckless, and it kept dislocating, and so I couldn't play football anymore. But the coaches made me the manager, so for football and basketball, I was able to travel with the team as their equipment manager,
Did you
and
enjoy that?
I really enjoyed it. I wanted to be out there playing, but it was really good because the coach would have me, especially with football, he would have me pay attention to what plays we ran, and then he would ask me to kind of chart how much progress we made. And then at halftime, he would study those and kind of get a game plan for the second half. So I felt like I was really contributing. But it was a lot of fun. One of the things that I really enjoyed was traveling with the team and being part of that.
One thing I'm noticing, so I like to listen to podcasts, read books, and they're saying one, as I've done a lot of these now, talking to guys your age, or even people raised in the 70s, 80s. Back then, a lot of your growing up years was a lot of play, right? You were out, you were socializing, interacting, and in 2010, that all stopped because I graduated high school in 2006. The iPhone came out in 2007, and they're saying there's a huge disembarkation of how people are growing up now with being on their smartphones all the time, and we need to get back to play, whatever it is, right? Just get off your phone, please, and go do something other than staring at your phone all day.
Well, I agree with that. Obviously we didn't have that. We had three channels on TV, but all of our time was spent outside. And I really loved the winters because there was a lot of snow and a lot of things to do. One of the fun things in the winter, the town I lived in plowed all the roads, and they would pile all the snow in front of our house. I lived on a 5-corner place, and so there was a big, huge empty spot in the middle of the road there, and so they would pile all the snow. So we would, all the neighborhood kids would go over there, and we'd play King of the Hill on that snowbank, and we'd play probably till 11 o'clock at night. Mm-hmm. And then, and our parents would come out and make us come in, and we'd be soaking wet from the snow, but we never seemed to notice the cold, but it was a lot of fun.
I had a couple of questions for you in regards to vehicles. Did cars back then last longer than they do now? Or do cars just... I feel like cars now have a lot more electronics in them, so it's harder to
keep them up.
Or back then, was it just easier to maintain, and did they actually last a very long time?
I think they were easy to maintain. I'm not sure they lasted longer. My first car was a 57 Ford, and I got that in 1967, so it was 10 years old. Mm-hmm. And it had a lot of life in it. But we really abused that car, We kind of used it as a Jeep. We kind of used it as we would see how far up a hill we could go and then come back down. And but it held up really well, and I ended up selling it and making some money. But because my dad worked for a Ford Lincoln dealer, a Mercury dealer, when I was a junior, we bought a new Cougar. Mm-hmm. They just come out, and I fell in love with the Cougar. So I was able to get a newer car. And we had some problems with it, but I really believe that those cars were just simpler.
Yeah.
A lot of, I could work on them all day long. I can't work on my cars now.
Right. I try to stay with newer cars so I don't have to deal with maintenance anymore. But when I talk to these guys, they're like, there's parts that should be easily accessible, but they put them in such weird spots that the labor to get to that part is so outrageous. The part itself is like $50. The labor is like $1,000. So they're just not designing them to be as friendly for people to work on.
Well, they're not. They're put together in modules, I believe, and so things are assembled and put in the car, and you can't get access to it unless you pull that module out or the engine out, to get to that part. I've seen some TikTok videos where, they've had to take the whole front end of a truck off, to get to change the spark plugs. It seems like
Yeah.
they are a lot more. They're not engineered for mechanics, that's for sure.
Yeah. All right. So a pivotal point in people's life is when they are ending high school and becoming an adult. And you kind of hinted to it or earlier where you thought you were just going to become a mechanic. But yeah, take us through that mindset at when you're graduating high school, what your thoughts on the future were.
I graduated in 1970. The selective service changed to a lottery system for a draft. And because I was not college material and I didn't believe I would succeed in college, and my number, my birth date came out to be 145, and they were saying that you were going to get drafted if you had a number lower than 175. So I was.
What is that out of? Out of 365?
Yeah, 360. There's 365 dates, and your birthday, goes into a computer. I don't know how they selected it, but so they pull these numbers out, your birthday out, and so my birthday was pulled the 145th time. So I was looking at the draft. And so I went and talked to an Army recruiter to see if I could do something. And I was thinking about being a medic. I had a friend that was in the Army and was an X-ray technician.
Just got an X-ray today.
Yeah. So I thought that would be a good thing to learn. And I was really seriously thinking about that. And I mentioned that to a few of my friends. And another friend of mine, the quarterback of the football team, and I were talking one day, and he said that he had joined the Navy and joined the Navy to be in the nuclear power program. And I said, well, I want to find out what this is. And so I went down and talked to the Navy recruiter. And the nuclear power program had training in Idaho Falls, which was 21 miles from where I grew up. And I thought, well, it'd be cool. I could join the Navy and spend the first year, training here at home. So I took all the ASVAB and all the tests, and I qualified for that. So
how'd you do? Do you remember? Average?
It was above average, and I'll get into that just a little bit. So this was like in March, my senior year, and so I joined the Navy in March on the delay entry program because there were so many people joining the Navy to keep from getting drafted that they had like a 9-month waiting list to go.
So did people join the Navy because they didn't want to go to the Army?
They didn't want to go in the Army.
Because the Army was 100% guaranteed that you would deploy.
Well, Vietnam War was going on there, so everybody was joining the Navy to keep from going to Vietnam.
So but the Navy was involved in the war.
Well, they were, but being on a ship, off Yankee Station or something, or in the, market time down in the southern part is a lot safer than being, a grunt.
Yeah, my dad, he was in the Navy, and he jokes that he spent like a total of 4 days on the boat his whole career. He was never spent time on a boat, which is kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, I did join the Navy. Went to boot camp. Did everything that I was supposed to do.
Did you enjoy boot camp?
I did. I could sing. My parents were very musical, and I learned that. And so we were sitting in boot camp one day, and the company commander comes in and says, "Does anybody here know how to sing?" And I raised my hand. "Come with me." And there were 3 of us. And we went into a room, and there was a civilian there, and he says, I'm the choir director here, and we have a choir made up of recruits and he kind of sold us on this going to see San Diego Padres games and singing the national anthem or marching in parades and then doing graduations. And so he asked us if we wanted to audition, and the 3 of us did. And I got selected and went into the choir.
So, I'm
So I
curious.
enjoyed that because it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm curious. Was your boot camp, was there a lot of yelling, screaming,
Yes,
and that didn't bother you?
it did. I, that's another part of the story. Growing up in Idaho, being kind of sheltered somewhat, we got to boot camp. They flew us from Boise, Idaho to San Diego, and we get there and we're greeted by some Marine drill sergeants. Why they use Marines, I don't know, because they combined the Navy and Marine boot camps are right next to each other. So they met us, stood us up in line, and we had to wait for a full busload before they would take us in. Well, by the time we
Does
got
that
to,
go off at midnight? Okay, I was like, wouldn't that wake you up at midnight?
no, I get used to it.
Yeah.
It does go. But by the time we got to bed, it was probably 1 o'clock. They issued you a blanket and gave you a bed. And so I'm crawling in my bed and I'm a little bit anxious about what's going to happen. And I don't remember if I actually went to sleep, but what I remember was it was dark and the lights came on and there were four guys and they got a metal garbage can and they were beating on it. Bam, 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 bam. Get up, get up, get up. Of course, we were all kind of shocked. And it was, looked at my watch and it was 4 o'clock in the morning. So they round us all up and they send us to the chow and they're yelling at us and screaming at us. And we were all nervous and scared, probably. I was scared. And they ran us, through all the things, we had to go get our hair cut. That was one of the first things we did. And that felt weird, you feel the breeze on the top of your head and that was kind of strange. And then they take you to issue you the clothes and then they had to take a swimming test. So we all went to the swimming pool. They issued us a swimming suit. We went to the swimming pool and you had to jump in and swim the length of the pool. And if you couldn't do that, they would put you in a special training program to teach you how to swim. I could swim, so those of us that passed that swimming test were put into a company, and it was yelling and screaming. And that night when I went to sleep, I said, "Craig, I think you made a mistake. This is probably not what you want." And
I wonder if because I had that thought when because they flew me to wherever, and then the drill sergeant gets on the bus, and he just starts yelling, and then I'm thinking, is this guy for real?
yeah,
I didn't find it scary. I found it more comical. And everyone has their own different reaction to it.
Yeah.
And I was like, what did I just do?
well, one of the things that kind of disappointed me, and I should have expected this, I guess, I heard language that I wasn't used to hearing a lot growing up in a small conservative community. It was just new to me and strange. And then the yelling and the choice of words and what have you just really made me think that maybe I made a mistake.
But then you stayed in how long?
I did a total of 27 years.
Yeah.
And it's a very eclectic experience. I didn't know this at the time, but now I do. I have ADD, and so I have a hard time staying focused on things, So when something exciting happened, then I was changed direction. I changed direction and changed direction. But it was all good. I probably made some choices that if I could go back would make again, but not make a different choice. But everything that happened was good.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to my story, I went to my A school, which taught me how to run an engine on a ship, because the nuclear power program, you have nuclear energy that runs the mechanisms on a ship. So you learn the mechanics first, then you go to the nuclear power program. Well, I should have known this. I couldn't keep up academically because I didn't have the physics and the math background that I should have got in high school, which I didn't. So I voluntarily dropped out of that program at the advice of my advisor. And because I dropped out, they needed to send me somewhere. So I had one of my friends from gone to a submarine in Pearl Harbor. So I thought, well, maybe I'll see if I'll go to Pearl Harbor. So I put Pearl Harbor on my dream sheet. And just kind of out of a whim, I put Vietnam. And 3 days later, I had orders to Vietnam. And I thought, wow, that's not really what I wanted. So
For most people, that'd be a nightmare.
Yeah. So the unit that I was going to was a boat unit that ran.
This is year what, 20 probably at this point?
I was 19.
19 still.
So I was going to go to a boat unit, river boats. And so I had to go to Coronado, which is where they train SEALs, and learn how to escape and evade if I ever needed to escape and evade, to keep from getting captured.
It was like a mini SEER school?
Yeah, that's what it was, a SEER school. And when I get there to go to SEER school, they said, oh, your unit's being reorganized, and we don't need you anymore because we're going to pull that unit out of Vietnam. I said, great. They said, oh, well, we see you put Pearl Harbor on your dream sheet, so we'll send you to Pearl Harbor. But it took about maybe 6 or 7 weeks to finally get orders to Pearl Harbor. So I was at Coronado working in the boat shop where they train SEALs and the SEAL boats. And I kind of enjoyed watching them. Those guys, they had to carry their boat with them everywhere they went. And it was kind of fun.
You wish you would have done that?
No. Maybe for a minute, the 19-year-old adventurous kid,
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole different level.
It is. And I thought about trying out, but I realized that, I didn't grow up with the mentality that those guys had.
Yeah, it's a different.
You mentioned something earlier about, Rangers do a good job of killing and SEALs do a good job of killing. And I realized that that's not, the career path that I want. Anyway, they sent me to Pearl Harbor. My ship had just deployed to Westpac, which is what the Navy calls going to Western Pacific, which is Vietnam duty. And I was going to meet the ship in the Philippines. So it took about a week to get my orders to get to the Philippines. And so my friend and I met up and he kind of showed me around and I had a good time. I was interested in Pearl Harbor. I spent a lot of time in the library reading about what happened at Pearl Harbor and made friends with the librarian there. And she loaned me a really nice book that I could take with me. And when I got to the Philippines, my ship wasn't there yet.
Did you fly there?
They flew me on a military airplane from Hickam Air Force Base to Anderson Air Force Base in Guam, and then from Guam to the Philippines. So I get to the Philippines. This was all in January, so I was wearing my dress blues. And I get off the plane in the Philippines, and it's like 90 degrees and 90% humidity, and just wasn't the kind of place you would want to wear these nice wool uniforms. The Navy base is about a 3 or 4 hour bus ride to Subic Bay.
You know what's really funny about me doing this? As you start talking to people, you realize how much in common you have with people
Other
more
people.
than you think. So I've been to the Philippines. I actually lived there for 7 years.
Really?
I've been to Subic.
Huh.
And so it's just so interesting. And that's why I encourage people to go talk to people that you may not otherwise, because you'll find you have a lot more in common. So I've had that same experience you had, right? Multiple similar experiences, right? hitting the Philippines extremely hot.
Yeah.
I did camp at Subic Bay. I probably slept in the same bunk that you stayed
Yeah,
in,
maybe.
just 30 years later. So it's funny. Yeah, continue.
Yeah. Well, my ship wasn't there yet, so I was in a transient barracks. They put you in a transient barracks with all the guys that are being court-martialed and what have you. You know, they're not. It wasn't bad enough that they were in jail, and so they threw me in with all these characters, you know, that were probably not the people that the Navy wanted, and certainly not people that I wanted to sleep next to. And it was right next to a river. So I went to bed that night, and I woke up the next morning, and I opened my eyes, and I couldn't see because I had so many mosquito bites that my eyelids swole. So I had to go to sick call, you know, because I couldn't see very well. I had mosquito bites all over. And why they didn't issue us mosquito nets, beyond me, you know. But I got bitten alive. Had about 3 days in a medical hold to kind of recover. And then I decided I was going to go to QB Point and go snorkeling.
You get a Purple Heart for that?
No. That'd be nice.
I mean, they drew some blood.
Yeah. And then I went snorkeling at QB Point, which is a beautiful place to go snorkeling. But I didn't realize that when you're snorkeling, you can't feel the sun beating down on you. And I got some really severe sunburns.
Another Purple Heart right there.
Yeah. So I go back to sick bay, and the doctor sees me and says, you know, what's up with you? You know,
Sick call Ranger.
sick call again, you know. Well, I was really naive, and I had to learn the ways of life a little bit. Had to learn about sunscreen and all that stuff. So finally, my ship shows up, and they assign me to the division that ran the engines on board my ship, and it was a fleet oiler. Not a very glamorous ship. It's not, you know, like a frigate or a cruiser or something like that. But I was a little disappointed that maybe it wasn't as glamorous as, you know, I would like.
Not as nice as the postcard.
Yeah, but I learned that it was actually very good because we didn't spend a lot of time at sea. We would go from the Philippines, we'd fill up with fuel, and then go to Vietnam. And have you heard of Yankee Station?
I've heard the term.
Yankee Station is off the coast of Vietnam, right where North and South Vietnam meet. And that's where all the aircraft carriers would operate. And usually there was at least 2, sometimes 3 aircraft carriers that were operating all the time. So we'd go to Yankee Station and refuel these aircraft carriers and the destroyers and the other ships that supported them.
How long would it take you to go from the Philippines to Vietnam?
3 days, 2 days, maybe 2 days. So we'd pump fuel for maybe 10 days, and then we were empty, and then we'd have to go back to the Philippines.
Take 10 days? I guess you're pumping all the different...
Yeah. We didn't do it constantly, you know, but we worked pretty hard, and there were times when, you know, I was down in the pump room, you know, for 3 days without, you know, constantly. But it was really nice because, you know, after being at sea for 2 weeks, you know, you're back in Subic for at least 4 days, sometimes a little longer if the ship needed repaired. So it was actually pretty good duty, you know. I'd talk to people that were on these cruisers and frigates. You know, they'd be out there for 30, 35, 40 days. And we'd take their mail to them. We'd take, you know, there was other ships that carried, you know, ammunition. There were ships that carried, you know, food stuff. But they were out there for a long time, where we were in and out. So it turned out to be pretty good duty. And that was my first Westpac cruise, and it was kind of uneventful. You know, go to Yankee Station, work hard, maybe go down south. Being down south, they called it market time. And that's where there were some Coast Guard cutters there and some small destroyers that kind of patrolled the Mekong Delta and different things like that.
Does the Coast Guard still I always thought they operated closer to the American shores.
I think they do, but there were Coast Guard cutters there, and I really don't know why they were there. There weren't a lot of them. Usually there was maybe one at a time. We'd see one, but they would mingle with the destroyers and the destroyer escorts that were down there.
Hmm.
And what those guys did, they'd patrol the Delta, and they'd also provide fire support for Marines with their guns, kind of like artillery. So a lot of times when we'd pull up alongside of them, the barrels on their cannons would be just, all the paint would be burnt off because they would shot so many rounds out of those things. And then sometimes we'd anchor in the river boats that I was supposed to go to would come, and we'd refuel them and do some repairs on them too. So that was kind of a quiet time when you're down in what we called it market time. That's what the Navy called it. Yankee Station, you worked really hard. And at market time, it was a little more relaxing.
Hmm.
So after 6 months, the ship went back to Pearl Harbor. And that was uneventful.
How long was that? Not flight, but
From the Philippines to Pearl Harbor was about 10 days. And we were in Pearl Harbor, just kind of minding our own business. A lot of crew members had gone on leave. A lot of crew members had gone to school. The unit, the division, which is what we called the units, we had about 50% manned because we were just, the machinery wasn't running. No need to have a lot of crew. And then we mined Haiphong Harbor. Kind of we wanted to get the negotiations going again, so the U.S. mined Haiphong Harbor. And our ship was called to go. And we had about 4 days to get ready.
Hmm.
And so what the Navy did is they took a bunch of people that were on shore duty there at Pearl Harbor and they assigned them to our ship. These guys were angry. Hey, this is my shore duty. And so in my division, we got about 8 of these sailors that came in that were on shore duty, and every one of them was angry.
Are you an E3 at this time?
I was an E4 at the time, second class petty officer. And we ended up heading back to Yankee Station, back to the Philippines and the Westpac. This time it was a lot busier. We worked really hard on Yankee Station because there were 3 carriers there, all their escort ships. The USS Newport News, which was a heavy cruiser, was there, and there was a bunch of ships. So we worked really hard, and we were constantly back and forth, back and forth. One time we were coming out of Subic Bay, and I had been promoted to an E5, and my job on a sea and anchor detail, I was what called petty officer of the watch in the engine room. There was a chief, an E7, and then there was me, and we had 2 throttlemen, and then we had a lower level watch and a messenger of the watch. And we were heading out of Subic Bay, and I'm paying attention to the bridge where the captain is, sends messages to the engine room on what to do through an engine order telegraph. And it's a thing, and you can see it go, cling, cling, and it goes to, reverse, full, all these different speeds. And it was usually routine. We're heading out of Subic Bay. It's probably about an hour to get out of the bay. Well, I start seeing some interesting bells. That's what we call them when the skipper changed I was seeing some interesting bells, and I thought, this is unusual. And then we have a rudder indicator too that tells you where the rudder is. And I was seeing some interesting things on the rudder. So I turned to the chief. I said, Chief, there's something weird going on. About the time I said that, the collision alarm goes off. I thought, oh, wow. So everybody was kind of confused. What's going on? What's going on? I said, brace for a collision. And we got an emergency stop, all back, and so we were answering these bells on the throttle on the engine is a big wheel. And so my throttlemen are doing this, and I remember from my training that in a collision, you need to sign the logbook right there when it happens. So I signed the logbook, and I went down to the lower level watch. He was, what's going on? What's going on? I said, I don't know, but the collision alarm went off.
What are you going to collide into? Can't you see if there's a boat out there?
No, I was in the engine room. Oh, you're talking about the skipper, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's a long story. I don't want to get into that. There's rules of the road, and there was a civilian ship, a big cargo ship that was not following the rules of the road, and it takes a long time, to change direction and so our skipper was maneuvering under the impression that civilian ship would follow the rules of the road. When it looked like he wasn't, our skipper started to take evasive action. That's why I was seeing the weird bells and the weird.
You don't have communication to the skipper down there?
We do, but usually they just order the engine order telegraph is what they do, communicate with us. But anyway, we ended up running into a cargo ship. We kind of collided, we were changing directions, and he finally changed directions, so he kind of collided like this. And then we stopped, and then he stopped, and his anchor grabbed all of the piping and stuff, ripped it off our deck, and so we had some damage. The hull was damaged, and we ended up going to Singapore to get that fixed. And there was later there was an inquiry, and because I was in the engine room, I was a witness in that inquiry. And that was kind of anticlimactic. I expected to be, it was kind of like a court, and I was going to sit there, and they're going to ask me questions. Basically, all they wanted me to do is they had the log, and they said, is this your signature here on the log? Yeah. Is this an accurate depiction of what happened? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. And that was it. So that was kind of disappointing. But our captain got relieved, and that was a sad day because everybody loved him. He was a great captain. He just made a mistake on. But anyway, we were on Westpac 10 months that time, and which was a long time to be away. We get back to Pearl Harbor, and all of the married people were glad to be back. I was single, so I volunteered to stand duty the first night so all the married guys could go home. And just kind of started another cold iron, being in the Navy kind of thing, go to work in the morning, come home at night. Ended up getting married after that. Got married in Honolulu in 1973.
How'd you meet her?
I actually met her in Hong Kong. And
did you go on vacation there?
No, I went on R&R there. But from Vietnam, the ship went into Hong Kong. That was one of the more popular ports. That's the port where everybody liked to go because you can buy stereo equipment cheap. You can buy, get suits made. You could get all kind of jewelry made. It was really a nice port. I met her in Hong Kong. Me and two friends went to a restaurant. I had been to Hong Kong before on my first Westpac cruise, and these two young sailors had not. And so I was, kind of showing them around. And we go to this restaurant, and they didn't know what to order, and so I ordered for them, and I was kind of talking it up. And So there was three of us, and there were three girls in a table that was probably about 10 feet away from us. And they were looking at us, and of course we eyeballed them too. There were three of them and three of us. They were about the same age that we were, and so we thought, man, they like us. That typical, oh man, they like us, because they look at you. So my friend got up and went over and started talking to him, and then he invited all of us over, and they were going to a movie because we asked them to show us around. They said, "Oh, we can't do that. We're going to a movie." And I asked.
They knew English?
Yes. So I asked, what movie are you going to see? And they said, "Oh, we're going to go see Oliver." And I had seen the play Oliver, and I thought, man, I'd really like to see that movie. I said, can we take you to the movie? And they talked with each other, and they said, yeah, you can take us. We get into the movie, and it's boy, girl, and I kind of had my eye on a different one than the one I married. And
she was part of the same group?
She was part of the same group. And they tried everything to discourage us. Instead of buying popcorn, they bought some dried beetles. And they were eating these beetles, and you could hear them crack, and I'm thinking, oh, this is gross. The movie has an intermission. So at the intermission, they said, oh, we're going to go to the bathroom. And we went to the bathroom too. We come sitting down, and the movie starts, and they're not there. And my two friends says, oh man, we got dumped. And I said, yeah, we did. So we're going to go. And I said, okay, go. I'm going to watch the movie because I enjoyed it. So my friends left, and I stayed. The movie was over, and I was walking back to a hotel where I was going to meet a friend from Idaho I knew.
How did you communicate back then without texting, emailing?
You didn't. You kind of had to make arrangements beforehand.
Yeah.
And I had made arrangements to meet a friend. He was going to stay on the ship and do some stuff. He was from Idaho, and so we were going to get together afterwards. But I was walking to the place where I was going to meet my friend, and I see the three of them, and they're buying from a street vendor, kind of like the hot dogs carts you see in big cities. They were all over in Hong Kong, and they were eating, I think, fish balls. From the street vendor. And so I walk up to him and I said, have you found the restroom yet? And of course they were embarrassed, and I kind of jokingly said to him, well, I think you owe me a date, because you stood me up. And they felt really bad. So he says, well, we do. I said, can we meet tonight? And they said, well, don't bring your two friends. You're okay. And I said, well, I have a friend I'm going to go meet. Can I bring him? And they go, well, yeah, I guess. So they give me an address of a nightclub where the sister of one of these girls was actually singing. She was a popular singer in Hong Kong. And they were going to go, and she was performing and invited me there. So I ended up going. My friend said he didn't want to go. He was married, and he didn't want to go. So I ended up going, and I sat down with the three of them, and Barbara, my wife, and I started talking, and I found her very interesting. And she had some questions that I had about life and this and that, and it became very, very clear that we had a lot in common. Well, my birthday was going to be 3 days later. I told her that, and she goes, oh, we'll throw you a party. And so she gave me her address and said, I'll throw you a party on this date, show up. So I showed up, go to her apartment. There's about 8 or 9 people there, all from Hong Kong, and they're ready to throw me a party. They have a birthday cake with my name on it. It was really kind of touching, I thought. And we had a good time. And then I had to leave. The ship was leaving, so she got my address. I got her address, and we corresponded.
Yeah, all through mail.
Yeah, all through mail.
That's before Skype. 'Cause I had
Yeah,
a long distance relationship and we Skyped all the time. But back then,
yeah.
that wasn't a thing.
Well, we ended up corresponding, and the ship went to Thailand, and I didn't want. I asked my chief if I could go to Hong Kong, if I could fly to Hong Kong, and he agreed to let me take 10 days of leave, and so I did, and I went back to Hong Kong, and I met her parents, and
They were
actually,
okay with a Caucasian man.
no, they weren't.
Yeah,
They weren't.
there's some cultural differences there.
Yeah. Anyway, uh, we hit it off, and I kind of enjoyed each other's company, and ended up going back to Honolulu, and we kept corresponding, and I wanted her to come visit. So she goes to the embassy to get a the tourist visa, and they say, we're not going to give a 18-year-old girl a tourist visa to go to the States by herself. So she, by then, we could call on a telephone long distance. I would go to a telephone
Are you like
place.
20 at this time?
I was 20. And I would talk to her, and it was a place where you paid, and then you'd call, and then when it was over, then they'd charge you whatever. And I started spending a lot of money on telephone calls.
It's all worth it though, right?
So I went to the immigration department. I said, how can I get this girl here? I want to. They said, well, apply for a fiance visa. So we did, and she got it approved, and she came. By this time, my sister had moved to Honolulu and had an apartment, and so Barb came and lived with my
Why
sister.
was your sister living in Honolulu?
Just an adventure. She had graduated from high school and went over there to work and kind of enjoy Hawaii. So we were partying all the time. What I mean by partying, it was mainly beach. Go to the beach, go to the beach, go to the beach, because we had no money, and Hawaii was expensive, and so we could go to a movie for $1, or we can go to the beach. So we ended up, me and my shipmates and Barb, my sister, and a couple of other girls, we'd all go to the beach. I asked her to marry me. She said yes. We got married 4 days later. And
How long have you been married now?
51 years.
51 years.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Anyway, I ended up getting out of the Navy, being married. We would go to sea to do things, and I'd be gone for a month at a time and come back and be gone for a month at a time. And Barb says, Craig, I don't want to live this lifestyle. So I got out. We didn't. I thought, well, I'll go back to Idaho. So I went back to Idaho, and she and I both realized that we couldn't live there. She grew up in a big city. I'd been to the tropics, the big city, and Idaho was just too bare and, quite frankly, ugly. It was March when I went back, and there was no greenery. All of the dirt and stuff from the winter was there, and it just was ugly. But I didn't know where to go. So I had some aunts that lived in the Seattle area, and I called them up and I said, hey, can I come stay with you and try to get a job in Seattle? So they said, yeah. So we came up. I worked for a while in the shipyard at Bremerton. And then we got an apartment right across from Edmonds Community College. And I was thinking, man, I'm right across from this college. Maybe I ought to go to college. So I went and talked to the veterans advisor at the college. And he encouraged me, you get the GI Bill, take some classes. And I had to take some pre-college classes because I wasn't very good in math. So I had to take some math classes. And I took an English test, and they suggested I take a pre-college English course, which I did. And then I started taking college classes at night. And I was working during the day, and it got to be pretty bad at the shipyard. So I got a job painting cars for a Lincoln dealer here in Seattle.
So your dad worked for Lincoln, and you ended
Yeah.
up working for
Yeah.
Lincoln.
So I would go to school at night and work for this in this body shop painting cars during the day, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I
This is
thought
what, like mid-70s?
it was 1974. I thought maybe I wanted to be a veterinarian, so I was taking a lot of biology classes and things like that. And
Do you enjoy animals?
no, but I thought about going to medical school, but I didn't think I was smart enough to. And I thought being a veterinarian, you don't have to be as smart as you do a doctor, which was wrong. Wrong assumption. But anyway, I really didn't know what I wanted to do.
You know what I like about that theme is I have a lot of nephews and nieces, so I think about what it's like to be young again. And I think sometimes when you're young, you think everyone has life figured out.
Yeah.
And then the more I talk to people, you realize most people don't know what they're doing.
No. I didn't know what I wanted to do until I was 30. But anyway, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I would take some classes and then I'd get distracted because I have ADD and I get distracted easy. And then I thought, well, I'll go into business, So I take business classes. So I was kind of struggling trying to find a direction. But I ended up getting an associate's degree from Edmonds Community College. And I thought, well, I'll transfer to the University of Washington and I'll get a degree in Chinese. My wife is Chinese. I'll get a degree in Chinese. I don't know what I was going to do with it. So I applied and I got...
Were you learning? Is it Mandarin, Chinese? What's the actual?
She speaks Cantonese.
Okay. What's more popular, Cantonese or Mandarin?
Mandarin's more popular. Cantonese is from Hong Kong and the Guangdong province, which is in the south. But I went down and I talked to the Air Force ROTC professor, and I took some tests, and he wanted me to join ROTC, and I agreed that I would go and join our Air Force ROTC because I thought I'd be a pilot. Wanted to be a pilot.
So you went from vet to Chinese to pilot.
Well, I'd be a pilot that spoke Chinese.
And
But
could treat an animal.
yeah. But anyway, the University of Washington didn't accept me, and the reason was I didn't have a foreign language. And I thought, how ironic. I'm going to major in Chinese, but I got to go take German or something at the community college before I can go to and learn Chinese. And it kind of angered me a little bit, and I was, 21 and I was a little bit cocky, and I thought, well, I don't want to go to University of Washington anyway. So Central Washington University had some classes at the campus at Edmonds, and so I enrolled. Well, about a week after school started, the ROTC professor calls me up. He says, Craig, you're AWOL, man. Where you been? And I says, well, I didn't get into the University of Washington. He goes, why? And I said, because I didn't have 2 semesters or 2 quarters of a foreign language. And he says, Craig, you should have called me. I could have waived that. He said, why don't you apply again for the winter quarter? And I thought, no, I don't want to go to University of Washington. They don't want me. I don't want them. That was kind of my attitude. And he says, really, Craig, you need to come apply again. I go, nope. I was pretty stubborn and naive. So the union that I belonged to went on strike. So now I didn't have a job. I was getting the GI Bill still, so I thought, well, what am I going to do? So I decided I was going to sell insurance. So I went to work for the Prudential Insurance Company, and I did okay. And kind of lost interest in school because I was doing well selling insurance, and I thought, well, I don't need a degree to sell insurance. So dropped out of school and continued working for this insurance. And then for some reason, I started to get tired of making cold calls on the telephone, the rejection,
Most people would.
I'd have to call, 100 people a week to get 3 appointments or 4 appointments. And 4 appointments, you may make 1 sale. So my energy level kind of went down, and my sales went down, and I was discouraged, not started to not do well. I had I did well at the beginning of, I won a lot of contests for beginners and what have you. But I kind of got
What kind
burnt
of
out.
policies were you selling?
Life insurance mainly.
Permanent or term?
Well, we were Prudential promoted permanent insurance
So
back
like
then.
whole life?
Yeah, whole life.
It's funny. Again, I didn't know you, but I've also dabbled in life insurance.
Did you?
Also went to see Central. As I was saying, you talk to a complete stranger and you realize
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you have a lot more in common.
While I was going to school,
Was your wife working at this time?
yeah, she was working. She was a waitress at a restaurant, a Chinese restaurant. But I was also in the Army Reserves. A friend of mine, one of my college classmates, was in the reserve, and he convinced me to join, and I did. And they gave me my rank and everything, so it was really
So it started at E5.
started as an E5. I started as a specialist, a Spec 5, and then they did away with the specialist ranks, and then I got the buck sergeant stripes. And I thought, my commander said, "Craig, you've got 2 years of college, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I do. I got 3 years." And he goes, "Well, why don't we send you to OCS?" And I said, "Sure, I'd like to go to OCS." So he said, "Well, you have to join the National Guard, and then the National Guard has an OCS program." And so I joined the National Guard and applied for OCS and got accepted and went through a National Guard OCS program, which was at Camp Murray down by Fort Lewis. It's a year long, and when I graduated, they made me a transportation officer because the unit that I was attached to was a transportation unit. And then I had to go to my officer basic course, which was in Fort Eustis, Virginia, for transportation. And I went there and ended up graduating top of my class.
So you're
And
mid-20s now?
yeah, mid-20s. Maybe 20, maybe actually, by this time I was probably 30.
Oh, okay.
I was 30. This is a true story, but I'm going to give it a little bit of artistic license. When I got notice that I was the number one in my graduating class, the general's aide came and said, "Craig, the general wants to talk to you." I said, "Okay." So I went to see the general, and he was a short guy that chewed on cigars all the time. And he was bald and shaved his head and kind of short and stocky. And I go into his office and report to him, and he's sitting down. He stands up and he reaches across the table to shake my hand. He goes, "I want to shake your hand. Did you know you're our distinguished graduate?" And I said, "Yes, sir. I just found out." "Well, that's really amazing. And I understand you're a National Guard officer." And I said, "Yes, I am." "Well, do you know that there are 5 West Pointers in your class?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I do." "And you outshined all of them." And I said, "Yeah, I guess I did." "Well, and he had kind of a raspy voice. He says, "I'm going to be a little bit embarrassed, to call you up as our distinguished graduate and as a National Guard officer. Did you know that I have it within my power? I can make you a regular Army officer?" I says, "I didn't know that, sir." "I can. Do you want to be a regular Army officer?" And I said, "Well, I need to talk to my wife." "Okay, where's she at?" And I said, "She's home." "Well, here's a telephone. Let's call her." Okay, so I call my wife. I said, "Hey, I'm in the general's office. He's offering me an opportunity to be a regular Army officer. Is that okay with you?" And my wife put up with me for a long time. And "Whatever you want to do, Craig, I'll follow you wherever you want to go." And I said, "Okay." She goes, "So what does that mean?" I says, "Well, we're going to not go back to Washington? She goes, I don't care. So I tell him yes. He goes, okay. Calls his aide in. He says, I want you to prepare orders to make him a regular Army officer. And right there on the spot, he swore me in as a regular Army officer.
Yeah, that's not typical in the military.
Huh?
That's not typical in the military to have
No,
something
it's
happen
not.
that quickly.
It's not. It happened in about 2 hours.
Yeah, I wonder how often if he'd ever done that before.
I don't know. He didn't say. So anyway, I went on active duty, and
So now you're an O1.
I'm an O1, butter bar, and they send me to the Army War College in Pennsylvania as the transportation officer for the installation. It's not a job I wanted, but I went. I needed to finish my degree, and I figured that being in a unit like that, I could finish it. So I went up there, and it was
You said you needed to finish your degree.
there's
They want
officers have a career planner at the Pentagon that kind of help guide you through.
So they're saying you need to have a bachelor's.
Yeah, they wanted me to have a bachelor's degree. I didn't. It wasn't mandatory, but he said if you want to be competitive, you need to have it.
Yeah.
And so he suggested I go there because there were 5 schools, 5 colleges there that I could go to, a night school. And so I went to the War College, which is where they train colonels to become generals. It was a good post. It was a lot of fun. I had a lot of family time. I could go to school. I learned about the Army and mingled with some high officers, and it was really kind of a good assignment for me. And then I went to Germany.
Phone?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So then I went to Germany and went to a truck company in Mannheim, Germany, and I was a company commander there. And I was a company commander for 2 years. And after that, I went to Stuttgart to be on a Corps Support Command staff. I was on a general officer staff. And after I did that, I went to school and got my master's degree in public administration.
So for a guy that wasn't very good at school, you went back and got a lot of degrees.
I did, and it was a lot of work, and it was a lot of night school, and I was gone a lot.
Did you feel like you had to try harder than the average person?
I did. Being in the Army, coming from an OCS program, a National Guard OCS program on top of that, and I was competing with West Pointers and ROTC guys, and so I had to work harder to stay competitive. Mm-hmm. Which was fine. I did very well. My career advisor at the Pentagon, every year, they give you a call and tell you how you're doing. And I was always told that I was, in the top 25% of the people in my year group. And so, I had some pretty good assignments because of that. I ended up going to Somalia when we had that Somalia thing as a general officer.
So you were there during Black Hawk Down?
No, I left Germany. I left Somalia right before that. I got a hernia. I was
after Vietnam War. It was peacetime.
It was peacetime, pretty much. We had Bosnia. We had those little skirmishes in the Panama and Grenada and places like that, but it was mainly peacetime. So I get to Somalia, and I was on a general staff, and my job was liaison. I was doing a transportation liaison between the U.S. Army, which provided all of the support for all of these United Nations units that was going to come in and kind of protect the non-governmental organizations so they could distribute food to the people that were starving. And what was going on in Somalia is there were 5 warlords that kind of divided the country up, and they were in charge. and they were battling with each other. It was a war zone. They were fighting each other. There was, they were fighting us a little bit. They weren't, there was no real big armed conflict, but they would try to sneak into our compound and what have you at night. So
Why was America even there in the first place?
there was a famine in Somalia, and people were starving, and non-governmental organizations were distributing food. Well, these warlords were confiscating the food. So the United Nations, who was in charge of food distribution, asked us to go in there and protect these convoys that were taking food into the places and protect the food distribution centers, to open the port. The port had been closed by these warlords were fighting over the port, and they sank ships in the port, and they wouldn't let ships unload. So we went in basically to provide security for these NGOs, non-governmental organizations, provide security for the port, clean the port up so that ships could come in and unload, develop roads so these convoys could go into places like Kismayo, that was way out in the desert, and Ballydogle and some of those places that were really, really far away from the port. And what had happened is that these warlords basically ruined the country. There was nothing, there was no electricity, there was no running water, because they took all of the metal that, and sold it. So all the pumps and the electrical generating equipment was sold. We were at the university there in Mogadishu, and they even took the aluminum out of the windows. So there was just these concrete buildings with no plumbing, no nothing. There was women had to walk out of Mogadishu, for miles to bring water in, and so they wanted us to, bring water to the city, bring electricity to the city, bring security to the city. And that's what we did. And we went in there and started to kind of rebuild the infrastructure there.
Mm. Do you watch military movies or TV shows?
I love them.
Did you watch Black Hawk Down?
I've watched it about 4 or 5 times.
So Sean Ryan interviewed, I think, one of the Delta Force guys that was there. So
Yeah.
that was a really good one.
Yeah.
So you probably like Sean Ryan, especially when he interviews.
I might. My son-in-law follows him and talks about him a lot. I probably would, but I don't listen to podcasts for whatever reason. I don't know.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So I know you have to go soon, but there's so much more to talk about.
Yeah, there is. I'm only about halfway through my.
Maybe this will be part 1, and we'll do
maybe a part 2,
because it's like some of his would get like 6 hours long.
Really?
And so he would have to break them up into sections. So maybe we'll do.
If you think I'm interesting enough to. But...
Well, no, I would like to hear more of your career. I feel like we're just getting in the intro.
Well, we kind of have. One of the things that I think I've learned a lot through some of the naive decisions that I made, that probably weren't the right decision. I talked briefly about that University of Washington thing. That was a big mistake. I should have contacted the Air Force ROTC professor and had him wave me in. If I could do it over again, I certainly would. But where I wanted to go, I eventually got there. I just had to do it this way. Through a lot of it was my stubbornness, a lot of it was my ADD, a lot of it was being naive, not willing to ask questions. And so, I had to learn those the hard way. which I think helped me a lot too.
Yeah. Are you okay with doing a part two? Maybe we'll schedule a
Sure,
part
I'll be
two
glad to do a part two.
because I still want to talk to you about the rest of your career and then what you did afterwards.
Yeah.
So let's schedule part two. But one thing to think about, because it sounds like where you are in life now, uh, you're able to reflect on the past. And one of the reasons you asked why I started this podcast is so that um, I have YouTube can tell me who's listening, like what the age group is. So I have a lot of people your age that listen, but it's also so that younger people can listen, and it's so that wisdom is essentially you can gain wisdom by personal experience, right? You can also gain wisdom by someone else's experience and learning from that.
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing you had said a few times is I was naive. I didn't know. And hopefully if other people can listen to someone else's story, then they can take from that and be like, okay, if I find my, everyone has a unique life, but we all have similar things that we go through, right?
And I see that with a lot of young people. A lot of the young people that I talk to that I know, some of them are making the same kind of mistakes I made, and it frustrates me a little bit because I want to kind of mold them and direct them, but then they have to find out for themselves.
And so that's the part maybe I want to talk more about in part two. It's as far as, so I have 4 kids, right? Some things in life you don't have to do yourself to know it's not good for you.
Mm-hmm.
You never will have to put your hand over fire to know that's not good for you. You just don't do that.
Yeah.
Right. And so like some people say, well, I have to do it first before I learn. And it's like, well, why don't you, wisdom is literally taking other people's experiences and learning from that so that I can make better decisions. So yeah, well, I want to talk more about that. And as far as some of the things that you as you're able to reflect on your life, and take what you've done, but also how can this apply to someone that's young and in similar positions. But yeah, we'll finish off your military career, and then I am interested to talk about your school career,
district, and then
because that is something maybe we'll get a little controversial, but right now school districts have a lot of power in regards to what's being taught in school and the product that is coming out of school. Mm-hmm. And it's like, are the kids coming out of school, are they being educated, or are they being taught propaganda, or are we actually, is the product that we're pushing out of school today, is it actually a good product versus is it kids that are being brainwashed? So I'm curious to see what your take was on in the school, in your time in school.
Well, I do have some opinions that, again, might be controversial.
And I'm okay with that.
And because I clashed a little bit with the educators. I'm not an educator. I was a logistician, and I did the operations part of the school district. But I went to board meetings, and I went on, cabinet meetings with the superintendent and what have you. And I lived in Germany for 10 years, and my wife's family had people there, and I was able to observe them and how the German education system is, and I compare that with the education system in Hong Kong. And I think we have some shortfalls in our education system.
Perfect. Yeah. So I really want to get into that because that's extremely important.
Yeah.
And one thing in America, for most Americans, we get so caught up in ourselves that we don't realize there's lots of other experiences, lots of other perspectives, lots of other countries, and we get caught up in our own little bubble.
Well, we do. And again, I would probably I could generate an argument with an educator just about any day of the week.
Yeah. So I'm excited to get into that because that is, I think that's a very important topic.
Okay.
to discuss for myself, but also just
Yeah.
in general. Because one thing we're not doing right now is having healthy conversations out loud. We're being told what to think instead of here's the facts. What now
Mhm.
we're redefining what fact is, right?
Yeah.
But here's the current situation. Now let's discuss it so that you can better understand and understand why this viewpoint or this viewpoint.
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
well, I appreciate the part one, and we'll schedule for part two,
Okay.
and we'll keep the conversation going. We still got to talk about your injuries and all that good stuff.
Yeah. People tell me I could probably write a book on my life, and maybe I can, but it certainly is interesting to me. I'm not sure if it'd be interesting to anybody else.
Yeah. All right. Well, I look forward to part two.
You bet, Josiah. You too.
All right. Good morning again.
And good morning.
Part two.
Wow.
Same shirt, new day.
No, it's a different shirt.
So I think when we ended our conversation before, we're kind of, I think towards the middle end of your Army career. But if we want to jump back into that, you had, let's see, where were you at? You had gotten married.
Got out of the Navy.
Got out of the Navy. Went to the Army.
Yeah.
Became an officer.
Yeah.
Now I think you're like mid-30s.
Yep.
I'm not sure where you're at.
Well, probably the most significant place to start, if we're going to do this, would be when I got to Germany as a young brand new captain. And I was assigned to a truck battalion.
Can I pause you for a second?
Yeah.
Was it your goal to become a general someday?
No, it wasn't.
Would you say most officers have that desire or no?
You know, I don't think most of them have that desire. And you know, I got my degree, or I got my commission in the National Guard, and I knew that I wouldn't be a general officer. I was older, got my commission in the National Guard, so I was kind of backdoored my way into becoming commissioned. So, you know, I would compete with all the West Pointers and all the other guys that walked on water. That's what we called them, water walkers. And I just wasn't that ambitious.
So what do you think is a normal goal for someone that's an officer? Is it 04? That's like a good goal?
Well, 05
Captain's
or 05 or 06. 05 or 06.
Yeah.
Major or excuse me, lieutenant colonel or colonel, I think I mean, that's where most officers usually end up retiring.
If they do their 20 years.
Yeah, 20 or 25 or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so continue. You're a captain and you're in Germany.
Yeah, I'm a captain in Germany, and it was in this truck battalion. And this truck battalion
You remember what year this is?
Would have been 1985. We were in the 3rd Support Command, which was the support command for 5th Corps. There were 2 corps in Germany. A corps has, 2 or 3 divisions in it. And there was 5th Corps and then 7th Corps. And our mission was, Central Germany. Fulda Gap, which was a place where it would be a good place for an invasion. So our mission was really kind of critical. And I really liked that job because we were supporting our units all the time. And so we were able to develop good relationships with the people we supported. And in our battalion, we had 5 companies, and started out as the battalion maintenance officer to do the maintenance on all the trucks, and that was on the um, um, battalion commander staff. I was only on his staff for about 6 months, and the company came open, and I got a chance to be the commander of that company, which was the 40th Transportation Company. It was a truck company that delivered fuel, and we had these tank trucks that we semi trucks. So we were running all over the place. My soldiers were out on missions every day.
Throughout this country of Germany?
The central Germany, from around Frankfurt, that area.
I'm curious when, back then, when you're out the base and they're on missions, are they carrying weapons?
No. The only time we ever carried weapons is when we did war games. There was a big one every year called Reforger, which means a return of forces to Germany. And that one was a live exercise where multiple divisions from our corps would do war games against 7th Corps in the South. And we would play these war games, and then they would carry weapons.
I was listening to a podcast recently, and they were talking about how the military has over 800 bases. The U.S. military has over almost 800 bases throughout the world, compared to most countries have 1 to 0. Which is interesting to think about, just the cost of maintaining all these bases all around the world. And is it really needed? Do we need all these bases? You know, some are pretty strategic, but now it's like, why do we have all these bases everywhere?
Well, that's a good question, and my personal opinion probably goes contrary to what a number of other military guys have. You know, I wonder the same thing. You know, we hear all the time about soldiers getting in trouble in Okinawa, and I'm wondering, you know, why do we have a base in Okinawa? But, you know, if we're going to be allies to people in Southeast Asia, I guess Okinawa is a good place to have it. You know, there's an Air Force base there, and then the Marines are there. So it's probably, strategically a good place. And they're cutting back in Germany too, and I can see the advantage of having some bases there, because we're part of NATO, and if we're going to support NATO, it's.
So we have multiple bases in Germany?
Yes.
How many in Germany?
I do not know.
That's so crazy. And maybe we'll get into this, but just like, so they're comparing and contrasting like what China does and what America does. China doesn't have bases all around the world, but they are building economic relationships with people. Hey, we'll help build your schools. We'll help build. This will help. We'll help you do all these things. And so now other countries around the world, they're looking to partner with China over the U.S. I'm not going to say that's right or wrong. It's just China, we've spent billions, if not trillions, on war, while China has been spending trillions on building other countries up. Because if you look at South American countries, even European countries, African countries, when China goes in there, they're not trying to start a war. They're not trying to tell them what to do. They're not trying to put a base in there, but they own everything. They own the companies, they own the infrastructure, they're building the roads. So it's like, who's, we say we have these bases for economic stability, but someone could argue that China is the one that's building all these partnerships and relationships versus the U.S. So that was interesting to think about. It's right now, China may or may not have more influence in a lot of these countries, and they don't have a single base. They don't have a single soldier in any of these countries.
Yeah. Well, you look historically what the United States did, and we did that too in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
We, um, but I'm not sure it was to benefit that country. It was to
Right.
benefit us.
Yes, and China's not doing it because they're being nice. They're
Yeah,
doing it because there is a benefit to them.
yeah. Natural resources, is the main reason.
Right.
So, the old adage that I heard when I was a young kid is what's good for General Motors is good for America.
Correct. Yeah.
And so, companies would go into countries and exploit the natural resources that were
Which
there.
I guess all China's doing is they're looking at what we did
Yeah,
50 years ago and we're like, let's do the same thing.
yeah,
Because again, it's not for the betterment of. I mean, it probably does help that country, but ultimately it's to bring back resources to China. And the
yeah,
U.S. is too busy with all these big, just the infrastructure to run this massive military.
yeah. Well, that's what one of the candidates for president wants to do is cut back on those things. And you know, part of me thinks there might be a value in doing that, but then I'm afraid that you need to have checks and balances and things. And if China's starting to flex their muscle, it scares me a little bit that if we don't strategically take care of some of those areas, like the waterways and stuff, so ships can navigate places and have ports and stuff. I think it affects the whole world. And if you have one big country, people think we're the big bad guy, and we probably are in some situations. But if China takes over, then they'll be the bad guy. When the Cold War was going on, it was Russia and United States or / NATO were kind of at each other, and now China is the big threat.
Yeah. I do want to talk a little bit more about the China-Russia or China-U.S. conflict, just because you're married to a Chinese, and you've been to China, so you may have a little bit more insight. But let's get back more to Germany. I'm also curious. Back then was generally, if you're in the military, you should have some kind of fitness. Was that a thing pushed when you were in the military then as well?
It was. We did PT every day, 5 o'clock in the morning.
When I was in, I was disappointed by the amount of overweight people I saw back in 2000. When was I in? 2007 to 11?
Well, they stressed that quite a bit, and one of the things that kind of broke my heart a little bit as a company commander is that I'd have good soldiers that were just a little plump, and we threw them out of the army.
Yeah.
You get good soldiers that are just a little plump, and the army was really tough on that. We didn't have a lot of overweight soldiers, so physical fitness was a big deal.
And I think it should be. It's like
Body composition was a big
in
deal.
the military.
Yeah,
We're not. I mean, yes, you're there for your intellect, but also you're there in case there's a war.
that's right. If you're if you're ever deployed you need to be physically fit.
But yeah, I was surprised to see a lot of unfit people.
Well, I think the Army's relaxed their standards quite a bit because it's not as popular now as it was, in 1970, 1980.
Do you remember what the PT standards were back then? I know they've changed since I've been in.
Basically you did a 2-mile run, and it depended on your age group. And then you had to do push-ups and set-ups, and that was really that's what the PT test was, a 2-mile run and push-ups and set-ups.
Would you try to max those out? to be a good
I maxed them out every time.
to show that I think a leader should do well so his troops can see a fit leader.
Well, that was my attitude. If I expect a soldier to run a mile, then I better be able to run 2 miles.
Mm-hmm.
And I had that attitude when I went in. In fact, little anecdote: when I retired, I was, I think, 48, and I thought, well, maybe I'll be a police officer. Well, you had to take a physical fitness test before you could get in. So I went to some high school in Seattle, and there were about maybe 100 candidates there. And I was looked around, and I was the oldest candidate there. So it was, push-ups, set-ups, 2 mile run basically was the test. And on push-ups and set-ups, I did very well compared to everybody there. But when I did the run, I was the fastest runner of all of those candidates, which surprised me a little bit.
Did you? I mean, we're jumping a little ahead, but
Yeah, we are. That was just an anecdote about
we'll get
physical
to
fitness.
that police part. But so, Captain in Germany. Any other events?
Well, as a company commander, I had to learn real fast. I was a very junior captain. I hadn't been with troops. My first assignment was an installation transportation officer at the Army War College. So this was my first exposure to actually managing troops. So I learned very fast. And what we did in Germany is that Fifth Corps did an alert where they would alert the entire corps, and we'd have to get ready to go to battle. And so, they'd call you up at 3 a.m, and you'd have to get ready. And then NATO would send inspectors to see how you did. And so there were people all over the place, kind of looking over your shoulder. And I had been a company commander for about a month. And I went down to my first sergeant and I said, okay, we're all here, what do we do? And he goes, oh, don't worry, Captain. The NCOs will take care of it. Don't worry, Captain. The NCOs will take care of it. So, okay, I tried to stay out of their business. And sure enough, I'd walk around and, there were NCOs doing things. And about 2 hours into this exercise, we were basically ready. And so the sergeants were sending soldiers to chow. Well, the battalion executive officer came to inspect me, the new commander, and he went down to a soldier and said, do you know what you're doing? And the soldier says, no. He went to a sergeant and he says, what's going on here? Where are all your soldiers? And he goes, well, they all went to chow. And so he kind of got a feeling that that I lost control of what was going on. So he came in and he just laid into me big time. You're incompetent. I walked around, soldiers don't know what they're doing, this. And, okay, what can I say? Well, he laughed, and I went back to the first sergeant and the truck master, and I said, wow, guys, I think you guys set me up. And they said, no, this is what we always do. This is what we did. Well, the person that preceded me in that company was known as, one of the better commanders. And so I said, well, what did she do when, when we had these alerts? And, well, she would usually sit in her office and drink coffee. And I said, really? Yeah. Let us do our jobs. We had control of it. It's just that, it looked chaotic. And so I thought, wow, okay, that was a learning experience. Maybe I just need to be a little more involved. But I thought it was kind of unfair that, this company commander that had a reputation of being the best, commander in the battalion, they never came and inspected her. And so when there was an alert. They didn't know what was going on in my company because I was in a different concern than what the battalion headquarters was. So, they didn't get a chance to observe them. But it really kind of made me mad a little bit that there was that little element. It was partly my fault. But I really enjoyed that job. I had some good soldiers. We did things that were fun. When I would send soldiers to do support missions, like a platoon, I'd send a platoon to support the Third Armored Cavalry Regiment, which is out. They were doing some exercises. But one of the things that was kind of interesting is that every year in Europe they had what we call the Nijmegen marches, and they did it in September to kind of commemorate a battle during Second World War called Operation Market Garden, where we jumped into Holland and we were to capture 3 bridges so that we could invade Germany. Well, it was a failure. We didn't, they made a movie about it called A Bridge Too Far. I don't know if you've seen that movie.
Maybe.
But it was a failure because I'm not going to say who, but I think there was some of our allies that just weren't as aggressive enough to make it. But anyway, so they commemorate that battle by having marches where they invite all the NATO units to put a team, and they would march, to these various bridges, and it was a 100-mile march. They had to do 100 miles in 3 days, and it was a competitive thing, and it was big. It was a big deal. Well, I got tasked to be the logistics support for that 1 year. So I sent a lieutenant and her platoon to do the support there. While about 2 days before the marches actually started, we got a new general. And he came and went to inspect the Nijmegen unit to see how
Did they? Was it just regular Army guys, or they try to have like special forces or
They were just regular Army guys.
dudes that were?
There may have been some special forces folks there. I don't know, but there were probably maybe 500 soldiers that participated. A team was a squad. There were maybe 12 men to a team, and they had to do this march.
I'm saying with the U.S. team, were they just regular dudes, or they try to send Rangers?
No,
Regular dudes.
Any unit could.
Oh,
Any unit could send a team, and our battalion sent a team every year, and we never won. We're truck drivers, usually the grunts, infantry guys that were a lot more gung ho than truck drivers. But anyway, he shows up at the installation where we had our logistics support, and there was a sentry there that was one of my soldiers. Well, he's in civilian clothes, and he's in a rental car, and he goes through the gate, and his driver and his aide were also in civilian clothes. So come through, the driver shows his ID, and so the sentry passes him on. Well, the general got angry because the sentry didn't salute him. So he got really mad, and he'd been there, for about 2 days, and he says, "I'm going to set an example. I'm going to set, my leadership start here. I'm going to fire somebody. I want that commander of that company that soldier belongs to. I want him here, and I want him here in 2 hours." So the aide calls down to the battalion and said, "Hey, the company commander of that," and they said, "Oh, it's Christensen." And the aide, I knew the aide, and the aide says, "Oh, Christensen, that's too bad for Craig, because the general wants to make an example out of somebody, and it just so happens that he got. So the general sent his helicopter down to get me, and it was about a maybe a 300-mile trip. I fly there to Nijmegen, and I get there, and I'm waiting around. I'm waiting around for the general to come and chew me out, fire me, or do whatever. And I was there about 2 hours, and I was talking with the soldiers, and I was asking how they were, and their morale was great. It's great being in Holland. So they were in good spirits. Well, the aide comes to see me, and he says, Craig, the general's distracted, and he's not going to get to you today. So why don't you fly on back, and we'll see what happens. So I flew back and was waiting, for the general to come in and fire me. And about 3 days later, he did an inspection of the battalion. And so we were all prepared, and he shows up. And when he was a battalion commander, he was a quartermaster, and he had a fuel company, or a fuel battalion. So he says, "Oh, tankers. I know how to find problems with tankers. It's the grounding rods. We had grounding rods in the ground. And when we parked them, we hooked these grounding rods, so they wouldn't get a spark and ignite the fuel that was in the tank." So he comes up, and he says, "Oh, you're Christensen?" I go, "Yeah." "Oh, okay. Yeah, I heard about you." That's all he said. And he goes into the maintenance area, and there's a door that's closed, and he goes, "What's behind that door?" And the maintenance warrant officer that was there said, "That's our storage room." And he says, "Oh, that's where you store all your unauthorized parts that you're not supposed to keep?" And he goes, "No, sir." So the general opened it up, and it was basically duffel bags and bags for soldiers that when we got deployed, they could just grab the bag and go. And he didn't find any parts there. So he didn't find a gig there. So he goes out to the line where all my tankers are parked, and he goes, "Okay." So he says, I know how I can find an issue with these. And he was going up, and he tried to pull the grounding rods out of the ground. He'd come up, tug on them, and, "Oh, that one's secure." And he did about maybe 10, and he didn't find one that he could pull out of the ground. And he turned to me, and he says, "I've never experienced that. Usually I can pull one out." He says, you guys are on the ball." And I'm starting to go, phew. The truck master was there, and the truck master goes, "Thank heaven." And he got busy, so he ended up leaving. And in the briefing when he left was, "Man, this is a squared away company. 40th Trans is a squared away company." And I felt really good. He didn't fire me. He remembered my name, but he didn't make a big deal of what happened in Nijmegen. So I dodged that bullet.
So I had a question for you in regards to this story and just power in general. Sometimes when people get into power, and even when you became a captain, you've heard the saying, "Power corrupts." Absolute power absolutely corrupts.
Yeah, something like that. I've heard that.
And it's like, how do you, because that guy just seems he was on a power trip.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you make sure once you are in a position of power to not let that happen? Because it's like, that's one thing that frustrated me with the military is as soon as someone had some kind of rank, they love to just laud that over you, whether E5, E7, E8, and then on the officer side. And it seems like that game, that's just human nature to play those kind of games. But it's like, A, is he actually trying to make troops better, or is he trying to boost his own ego? From the way you explained it, it sounds like he was just trying to boost his own ego. Like, oh, let me see if I can fire someone. I never liked that. And I think one of the issues I had with the military was you had a lot of guys who were in leadership that never should have been. And that just keeps perpetuating. There are people that should be in leadership but don't get it, versus people, if they stay around long enough, they end up being in some type of leadership position. So I'm curious how you wrestled with that. when you had poor leadership or guys that said respect me because of the rank, not because of who I am?
Um, that was a big issue that bothered me. Quite frankly, that's one of the reasons that I decided to get out. It was, I don't want to belabor this, but in the 90s, the Army did a reduction in force, pretty severe,
Mm-hmm.
and they got rid of a lot of guys. So the competition got cutthroat. I
Yeah.
mean, it was pretty bad. But this particular general officer was exactly like that. And I have another anecdote that
You just wonder how they got where they got, you know?
well, they got that way because that's the way that's what the Army, that's how the Army promotes people. Number one, to get promoted, it's Army wide. So you got a board of generals and colonels that sit in a room, and they look at your file, and there are certain things they look for. And so people figure out what they're looking for because it's pretty standard each time you have a promotion board. There's a photograph that you have to put in your file, and that photograph can ruin you if your uniform has a wrinkle in it, or you're not wearing all of the medals that you're supposed to have and all that stuff. It really can ruin you. And if you look a little bit overweight, so there are some kind of arbitrary things that they use. But I honestly had most of the commanders that I worked for that were not general officers were pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
After that riff, that changed. And a lot of the officers that I worked for it was like they were scared. Like I worked for colonels that had no chance of becoming generals, but they were afraid to make decisions and do things, and it really frustrated me and a lot of my colleagues that were in the same level. But anyway, this general officer did have an ego, and there were several things that happened in his 2 years of command that we just had to shake our heads. And it was a little bit of a waste of resources, some of the things that he did. Here's a good example. We had to do an exercise, and we had a $1 million budget for this exercise. So we on his staff got together and said, let's do it it was a command post exercise. So it was done without soldiers. So let's do it in our normal office space, and we'll run the scenarios and do it that way. So when we briefed him, he threw a fit and he goes, no, we're a deployable unit. We need to deploy. So, okay, so what are we going to do? So we ended up, he was talking about, we need to be tactical, we're a deployable unit. So we ended up renting German fest tents that you would see in like in Oktoberfest, these big, huge tents. And we rented like 4 of them, and then we couldn't take our computers out there for security reasons, our computers. So we had to lease a whole bunch of computers, put the programs on it, put the data on it so that we could run the exercise. And we had to mobilize, the support battalion to support it, so they had to. So this exercise, and I'm thinking, yeah, we're really tactical with these big red, white, and green and white, fest tents. And we had to, get generators there to generate electricity. We had to run the wires, and the budget went from $1 million to $4 million just because this general said, no, we're a deployable unit, we're going to deploy. Okay, we deployed in the football field, 300 yards away from our offices, and set up, this monstrosity and everybody felt the same. It was kind of like, what a waste.
It's interesting you say that story because it's like, think about the military, the government, is because they don't produce revenue, they don't understand the cost of what it is they're doing because they don't have that profit, right? When you
Yeah.
work for a private company, right, if you're going to have some expense, there has to be a reason for it. Because if you don't have revenue coming in for that expense, then you're like,
Yeah.
that's not going to happen. But when you
Well,
work
that's,
for,
you go broke and you're out of business.
right, but for militaries or when you're not, it's not your money, you don't see how it affects the bottom line, you can make decisions that someone is paying for, which is essentially the tax dollar.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's, since we were both in the military, we can share more about it. But yeah, there are some, especially when I was in the military, it was, we had active wars going on, so there was less games. It was like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
so that was the nice thing was everything was for a purpose. But I can only imagine in peacetime, just playing all those little mind games and tricks, and
Yeah.
it's like, what do we do it? So, what happened after you were captain? Did you go up in rank?
Yeah. I I went to I got promoted to a major,
Was
and
that difficult?
getting promoted or at the job after.
Yeah.
I don't think getting promoted was difficult. I had a good record, and so when I went before the board, it was natural. Two of my friends did not get promoted, and you get promoted or you get booted out. So it was kind of sad to see them leave. But when I became a major, then I had to find a job, and I found a job as an executive officer for a battalion that trained AIT. It was an AIT battalion, and that was an interesting assignment. A lot of my duties there were dealing with soldiers that got in trouble, and what do you do with them? They're just out of boot camp and they're at AIT, and female soldiers that are pregnant, and can't physically do what they need to do to get through it, and
Did
then
they keep them in or did they kick them out?
they try to keep them in. We ended up getting rid of one soldier that became quite an ordeal. This soldier had some complications, and so the medical people felt that she needed to go home to be around family, so that there would be somebody there to watch her and take care of her. And I never met the soldier. It was all from paperwork. Well, she went home and she had the child, and she had a doctor at her hometown write and say that she needs to stay home. She needs that care, and so she was gone for like 3 months, and we decided that, we sat down and said, she needs to come back to the base, excuse me. She needs to come back, we can take care of her, and she fought us on that. She didn't want to come home. She didn't want to come back to work. So she wrote her congressman, and so I had to answer the congressman's letter. And so I went to talk to the medical folks. Medical folks says, yeah, we can take care of her. There's no reason why she can't come back. And I called her doctor and talked to her doctor, and her doctor says, well, probably ought to stay here. I don't think she would do well in the Army. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, she gained a lot of weight, and I'm really concerned that if she goes back to the Army that she's going to have some issues. I said, well, send her back. We'll deal with that. So she did come back, and she was so big that we couldn't get a uniform for her. And she wrote her congressman again saying that she was being mistreated, by having to come back. And so I had to answer the congressman again, and so this was back and forth. And finally,
This was late 80s.
this would have been the early 90s. So finally, we agreed that she probably shouldn't be in the Army. But she wanted to be in the Army, and I don't know why.
She wanted the benefits.
Well,
Free health care,
that
salary.
I agree with that. But I'm not going to judge.
I'll judge. I mean, everyone wants to get paid. No one wants to do the work.
Yeah, that's exactly what was going on. I mean, she'd been in the Army for, almost a year now and hadn't done anything. So that's what it was, And so we finally, I had to write her congressman again and said that she really needs to not be in the Army. She's not soldier material. She's not performing as a soldier. And then finally the congressman wrote back and said, I agree, do what you need to do. I think you've treated her fairly. He had some staffers, that were working with the doctors and working with the company commander and what have you and they did believe that she was being treated fairly. And so he ended up discharging her. But that was one of the things those kinds of things were the kinds of things that I had to deal with. Another thing we had to deal with is one of the company commanders in the battalion got into an affair with a battalion commander from another battalion, and it was discovered, and the general felt that we needed to discipline both of them, and so I had to discipline this young female captain for having this affair with a married battalion commander. And, that there were a lot of details I don't want to get into, but I really kind of feel that, that she shouldn't be the one to get disciplined, but she was, and we had to.
Was she demoted?
We convinced her to resign.
She got out of the military?
Mm-hmm. The battalion commander ended up losing his command, and he retired because he had 20 years. He got divorced, and the captain and this battalion commander ended up getting married.
Oh, well, it worked out.
It was fine.
Happily ever after.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, the things that you're talking about. It's just human nature.
Yeah.
Right? Things like that happen. And I don't think they're ever going to stop happening.
Well, it does. Relationships happen.
Yeah.
But I was deployed to Somalia. I don't know if we talked about that in part one or not.
Off camera, I think we talked about it.
Okay, yeah.
So this is when you're a major?
Well, I was a promotable captain. This is right. I was selected for major, but you get promoted on your anniversary date. So I was considered a major.
How many years had you been in the military at this point?
Maybe 9.
And then how many were you as a Navy?
I was in the Navy 4 years.
So 4 plus 9. So at that point, you knew you were going to do your 20 at least, right?
Yeah, yeah. I could read.
13 years in.
Yeah, I wasn't going to be forced out because of not getting promoted. But one of the, I think we did talk a little bit about Somalia, why we were there, and what have you.
Yeah, yeah, I guess we did.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't need to go back there. And after my stint as a battalion XO, I went back to Germany, and I was on the EUCOM staff, European Command.
Were you happy you had to go back to Germany? Or
Yes. I was a little disappointed that my orders. Well, I went to school to learn how to be a joint staff officer, and that school was 13 weeks or something like that. It's where you learn, about the Navy and the Air Force and the Marines and how we all have to work together. Because EUCOM is what's called a joint staff, and that's where the commander of EUCOM is in charge of all the Navy units and Air Force units and everything that's in his command. And the European Command,
is that what branch normally takes that position, or do they change the
it
branch?
changes. In Europe, it's an Army guy. In the Pacific, it's a Navy. I can't. Then you have Transcom, which is an Air Force
Do you
guy.
feel like the military just has a lot of red tape and bureaucracy? There's a lot of just
Yes.
middle managers.
Yes. They're doing away with that. They were starting to do that as I was getting close to retirement, they were consolidating things. Like in the Transportation Corps, which is what I was a transportation officer, they were doing away with that, and they were kind of combining bases. Like if there was an Air Force, like we have here, we got Fort Lewis and McChord, so it's Joint Base Lewis McChord, and so they were starting to do that. And the training that when I was an instructor, we combined schools. Instead of having a transportation school, a quartermaster school, a maintenance school, and a medical school, they combined them all into one. So they were starting to get rid of a lot of the waste that was going on. So when I went to EUCOM, that's the U.S. contingent of NATO. So we were a NATO organization.
When you were in Germany, did your wife work as well?
Yes.
So she always just found jobs that she was able to do?
She had two cousins that lived in Germany, in Stuttgart, where I was stationed the second time. And they owned a Chinese restaurant. And my wife worked there. They had 3 Chinese restaurants, actually. And my wife managed one of them.
So you got a lot of Chinese food?
I had a lot of Chinese food. I've had a lot of Chinese food for the last 51 years.
So I've heard that, again, I don't know. So like Taco Bell, supposedly Mexican food, but is very not the same as actual food from Mexico. And I've heard the Chinese food that we eat here in a Chinese restaurant is not the same Chinese food as actually served in China. Like all these like names that we have for Chinese food, they're like, that's not a thing in China. Is that true?
It's changing. It used to be true.
Like orange chicken, sesame chicken,
chop suey, all that stuff.
They're like, that's not a thing in China.
You don't get that in China. But it's changing. The restaurants now are becoming more authentic. So
I wonder if I've ever actually had real Chinese food.
It depends on where you go. We kind of make fun, like Panda Express, for instance.
Yeah, that is not Chinese food.
It is, but they've Americanized it to the point. I don't like eating at Panda Express, but my grandkids do, and my wife does too, because it resembles Chinese food.
Resembles, a good term. So let's wind down, or So you went back to Germany. Anything significant happened there?
Yeah, we that's when we went into Bosnia. We went to Bosnia to kind of keep the peace in Bosnia,
Hmm.
and so being on a general staff, we were in charge of that. And one of the things that frustrated me as a transportation officer when the Army decided to start getting rid of organizations, they got rid of the the movement control agencies in Europe, and that's the agency that works with the Germans to clear for convoys and put things on rail cars and basically move around in Germany. And there was an organization called First Hamka which did that job. Well, they did away with that organization. So when we were moving units that were stationed in Germany and we were moving them into Bosnia, we didn't have any movements people to do that. Well, that was my specialty. And so when I was on the general staff, I worked with USAREUR, which is United States Army Europe, to move those in. And it was not very efficient because we didn't have the movement agencies.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to be involved in that a lot. And it frustrated me, and I kind of voiced my frustration, and I kind of ran afoul of the leadership in the command, which I was fine with that because I was, probably three or 4 months short of my 20, and so I didn't have to protect my career. And so I kind of voiced my opinion and angered a number of colonels and angered the general because of that. And I didn't care.
Yeah.
It was a point that I was frustrated at the point that, I was working hard. I was working, 16-hour days to try to get this mission done. And it was frustrating. This is where I learned that, these colonels that were scared of the general, and I couldn't understand why they didn't stand up for the suggestions that the majors and lieutenant colonels made, and why they wouldn't stand by us. And so that's when I said, it's time for me to leave the Army.
So you did how many years?
It was a total of 20.
20 years. You got your 20.
Mm-hmm.
So recapping, couple questions. And it may have changed, maybe it was slightly different today, but I like to ask my guests who have had a long career in whatever field. But I guess what would you say is someone that is what would it take to be a good officer slash leader in the military? What are some key characteristics that distinguish them versus ones that aren't as good?
I can sum that up kind of with a pithy answer in that take care of your troops and accomplish your mission. When I was in OCS, the colonel that ran the school, he would drill it into us, and it's pithy and simple to remember. First accomplish your mission and then take care of your troops. And one of the things that I really felt was my responsibility was taking care of my soldiers. When I was a company commander and I'd send a squad or a platoon, to support an organization, usually after 3 or 4 days, I'd go visit them and see how they were being treated. And sometimes they weren't treated very well. They weren't part of that unit, and some of the commanders there just kind of brushed them off, and I pulled my soldiers out sometimes if they weren't being treated. It usually ended up that they got the care that I felt they deserved, because the officer that was in charge, realized that these guys got to be here.
How would you make sure you would be getting honest feedback from your troops? Because I think sometimes, and this is true in private organizations, is a leader will say, I have an open door policy. You can come to me whenever you want. Or he'll do a survey. Tell me how you're really feeling. But then no one, because so much of what people do operate out of fear, how do you know that you're getting real honest feedback from people that you're supposed to be in charge of?
Well, I believe that I did, and one of the techniques that I used to use, um, I, one of my colleagues, I'm going to borrow a phrase from one of my colleagues, said, I used to walk through the motor pool kicking rocks. So I would, during the day, I would get out of my office and I'd go down where the soldiers were and watched what they're doing and would come up to them and talk to them. And um, there was a book I read one time that the author said, it's management by walking around, where where you get out of your office and you go down and talk to the guy who's running the machine, or the soldier, that's changing tires in the tire room, which was one of the crummiest jobs in our unit. Or you go to the supply office, and look at and talk to the supply sergeant. When we had inspections, when Fifth Corps came down, they called us at 3 a.m. and said, "Hey, we're going to do a maintenance inspection." I'd put coveralls on and I'd crawl. We had a pit, the trucks would drive over a pit, and I'd be in the pit with the inspector. And if the inspector saw something and says, "Oh, this is a gig," I'd say, "Why is that? Help me understand why that's a gig, or why that's a deficiency." And they would explain it to me, and I was genuine. I wasn't trying to, I wasn't there just to show my face. I truly wanted to know why he considered that unsatisfactory. And when I would go and see soldiers that were doing things, I'd say, why are we doing this? And they usually had a good answer, an answer that I kind of expected. So I felt like I developed a sense of trust with the soldiers. And I didn't, when they got in trouble, I usually tried to find out what was going on and be a little bit benevolent. I have an example of this. During one of those NATO inspections, when one of my soldiers, his name was Holman, he was kind of a misfit. He was promised something by a recruiter and it didn't pan out. And when I got him, he was pretty sour. So
That's almost every person in the military. The recruiter promised me this, and that's not what I got.
Well, part of it was his fault, and I don't want to get into the details, but he was a truck driver in civilian life, and he was promised that he'd get promoted to spec 4, right away. But he had to meet the responsibilities. He had to get a driver's license, in the Army, and we had a school, and there was some requirements to do that. And he was so angry about not becoming a Spec 4 right out of boot camp that he kind of turned off and didn't want to participate. He was recalcitrant at that point. So he was in the tire room, the crummiest place to be. And he loved it. He was by himself. Nobody bugged him. Well, during that inspection, the truck master sent him to breakfast. Well, he left his weapon in the tire room. Well, one of the NATO inspectors came and saw the weapon and picked it up. And when we found out it was Holman's, the battalion commander was extremely angry, wanted this guy court-martialed. And so I thought, man, of all the soldiers to mess up, this is one that I was trying to to bring along. I was trying to rehabilitate, if you want to use that word. And then he makes this mistake. And it was a honest mistake because there was so much confusion. He just ran off to chow, and forgot his weapon. It was a serious offense, but I could understand, me doing that. I could see me doing that. But anyway, the battalion commander, I want him court-martialed, Craig. I want him court-martialed. And so this was a Friday, and over the weekend, he called his mom and he says, hey, I'm going to get court-martialed, and on. So his mom called me and kind of explained a little bit about Homan's background. And I thought, okay, here's a guy that has never had a break in his life. And he joined the Army hoping to make it a success out of it. And he made this simple mistake. And so, I think it's kind of sad that, we have to derail him trying to make it. So I went to the battalion commander and I convinced the battalion commander that I could deal with this without a court-martial. He didn't need to be court-martialed. And I spent probably 2 hours on Sunday, talking to the battalion commander to try to convince the battalion commander to let me handle it in a non-judicial way, in Article 15. And so Monday morning, I called Homan in. I said, Homan, I know you feel you're going to get court-martialed, but the battalion commander gave me permission to take care of this myself. And I did everything I could do as a company commander, but I suspended a majority of it. I was going to reduce him in rank, and I restricted him to the barracks for 15 days. That was the maximum I could do.
So you went from E1 to E2, E2 to E1?
Well, from E3 to E1. But I suspended the reduction in his rank. The barracks, I forgot the term we called it, restricted. The restriction to barracks he had to do. And he did that, and he told the first sergeant, he says, I feel like the battalion or the company commander is on my side. I want to get my driver's license. I want to drive. So he turned around based on that incident. Yes. And I had multiple ones I could talk about.
So it sounded like, from what I'm hearing from you, is don't just say you care, actually care.
Yeah.
It sounds like that was the type of leader that you were.
I tried to be. I loved my soldiers. I really did. I knew their wives' names. I knew if they had kids. I was the retraining company. When the sergeant major had a soldier that wasn't making it somewhere else, he would assign him to us because we would either turn him around or get rid of him. There's another situation I want to talk about because I'm pretty proud of this one. There was a female soldier that just wasn't making it in the company that she was in. And so the command sergeant major came to me and says, Craig, I want you to either make her a soldier or get rid of her. So me and the first sergeant were discussing this, and we didn't know what to do. And I said, I think we need to show her that she can be a soldier. And how do we do that? Let's give her a job that is well sought after. Let's make her my driver. And the first sergeant says, you want her to be your driver? And I says, well, let's dangle that carrot in front of her.
You're a major or captain?
No, I was a captain at the time. So she came to us. She had long fingernails, and her hair was a funky color. And her uniform had been tailored, to kind of accentuate some of her positive things, which was against Army regulations, So she's standing in front of me, and I said, we're going to make you my driver. It was a Thursday, I think, and and I want you to get my vehicle squared away. My vehicle was the worst looking. My Cuck V was the worst looking Cuck V in the battalion because I didn't have a driver. Nobody took care of it. I want you to square my vehicle away, and I've got to go see the general at the headquarters on Monday morning. And I want that vehicle squared away, and you'll drive me up there. So I show up on Monday morning, bright and early to get my vehicle, and I couldn't believe how good looking that vehicle was. And she talked to a bunch of the senior NCOs to give her pointers on how to do this, and she used baby oil, and it had it had a special paint that would oxidize really, and if you put baby oil on it or some kind of oil, it really brought it out, and she baby oiled the whole thing. She put Armor All inside. In fact, the seats were vinyl and they were so slick that I was sliding around in the seat, but it looked good. She was dressed properly. Her fingernails were gone. Her hair was a natural color, and she knew the route. She'd done a map reconnaissance. She got some of the senior folks to tell her how to get there to the headquarters. Worked great. I go to my meeting, she's mingling with other drivers there, and they were comparing. I had the best looking vehicle there. I came out and all the vehicles were lined up there, and I go, man, she did a good job. She ended up being my driver until I gave up my command. And when it came time I promoted her to sergeant. When it came time for me to change command, she was bawling, and she gave me a gift, that it was well thought out, and she got me crying, So, I turned this soldier around by basically trusting her and giving her an opportunity to do a good job. I gave her the opportunity and she did it. And most of the soldiers that I did that to they measured up. There were a few. I had a sergeant that, he was handing out basketballs in the gym. Here's a staff sergeant. And battalion sergeant major gave me him, and I made him a squad leader, and he just couldn't do it.
You can't fix everyone, but
Yeah,
it sounds like for you, sometimes when people regularly have negative interactions with other humans, then they just write everyone off. But it sounded like, from your experience, you took each individual that you had, and you didn't use historical data to say this guy won't make it. I'm going to give this guy a fair shake. And that seemed like the type of leader that you were. So it's unfortunate. And that's another saying is the good ones also get out.
Yeah, let them do.
Like in wartime, when we had, war, we were at war for almost 20 years, not longer.
Yeah.
Good soldiers would end up getting out earlier than they wanted to because of poor leadership. Yeah. When in reality, the poor leadership should have been removed so that the good leaders could stay and actually rank up. But yeah, I guess that's just a common problem that occurs in organizations like that because they don't have a revenue, they don't really see the costs.
Yeah. Well, I had a lot of good experiences in the Army, but I found that when I got up into where I was working on general staff, which is what I would finish my career as, it frustrated me, and I saw things that I didn't like, and it was time for me to leave.
Yeah. So, other few questions before we tie that up. When you were in the military, did you have hobbies outside of that? So you weren't because some people, their whole identity becomes being the soldier, that they find themselves not having any other type of identity, personality, interests, which can hinder them just because they don't know how to identify other than being a soldier.
Yes, I did. I was a avid runner, and I would join running organizations and do 10K runs and help organize 10K runs, and I got into that. I also my church was also an important place for me to go to get a different identity. So running and church activities kind of kept me in my civilian world.
Yeah, because I'll see guys that get out, and it's like, especially if they had some kind of rank in the military, they were surprised when they get no respect in civilians. Yep. And it's like, 'cause no one cares, man. No one cares if you're E8, E9, yep. 05, 06. There was a guy that I knew who got out. He was going to be a general, and he ended up getting out, and he was so lost because his whole life was dedicated to becoming a general. Once he didn't get it, he got out. He just didn't know what to do with himself.
I have seen that happen quite a bit.
He ended up getting divorced because his wife only ever knew him as a soldier, working all the time. So when he came back and actually had to be with her, she was like, I don't like this guy.
One of the officers that I worked with on more than one occasion, because in the Transportation Corps, it's a small branch and you kind of work with each other from time to time. He retired and he went to work for an organization that supported operations like in Afghanistan and places like that. And they would hire retired military guys. And one of the things that he used to say to me all the time, he says, I hire these guys and I have to tell them, we need to have a retirement ceremony for you because the first one you had didn't take, because they come to work for him and they want to carry their rank. And he retired as a lieutenant colonel, and he would hire colonels sometimes to work in his company. And these colonels, felt they were still a colonel. And, he would have to say, oh, we're going to have to give you another retirement ceremony because that first one you got didn't take. You're working for me now, you're not a colonel anymore. So that happened a lot. And I've heard of other things. I did meet one time I was in North Carolina and I was looking at some real estate, and the real estate agent came to see me and he pulls up in this nice Porsche. And I said, you're doing well in real estate. And he goes, well, my real estate's really a hobby. I'm retired from the Air Force. And I go, oh, really? What'd you retire as? A lieutenant general. And he was probably one of the most down-to-earth guys, He got the Porsche because he was a general and had the money to do that. And he was just selling real estate to kind of stay busy. Mm. But, I talked to him for probably, a half hour before that came up. And I just thought, he was such a nice guy. He didn't have lieutenant general on his business card. But, I see a lot of guys, like in their checks, they'll put, lieutenant colonel or colonel retired,
Yeah. It's like, why?
Yeah.
Like this organization that I was associated to before, they hired this guy and he kept referring to himself as a general. It's like, dude, you're a civilian.
Yeah.
Right? Like, no one cares that you were a general today or in the past. It's like, why are you still going around identifying yourself as a general when the only person that maybe has some ability to say that is a president, right?
Yeah.
Of America, they can still say that. But it's like, why? Why were you doing that? So, you did your 20 years. Was it scary getting out, having to transition, or were you ready? So,
it was scary. I was a little bit older than most of the guys getting out. And when I started, number one, I didn't know how to transfer my military experience into civilian experience. And that was a...
What year did you get out?
98.
So this is a couple years before war kicked off.
Yeah. In 98, I got out and I really didn't know. When I was in Germany and anticipating getting out, there was a job fair for people that wanted to retire. And the Seattle Police Department was one of the organizations that was there. And I took a test with them and passed the test. And they said, hey, when you get out, come see us. So I thought, okay, well, that's a good fallback. And so I went through the police recruiting process and got to the point where I was actually going to report to the police academy. And I got another job offer from the Issaquah School District.
Why did you take that over the police? Or you just realized that
my wife didn't want me to be a police officer.
Yeah. Well, now they're having a hard time getting.
Yeah, they are having a hard time.
I just saw. I haven't substantiated this article yet, but they're saying that you can now be a non-citizen and be a police officer in the city of Seattle. That article just came out like this week. So I have to.
Could be. I mean, they are hurting.
But basically, they're saying if you're an immigrant, you can.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of immigrants in this community, so it might pay off.
Well, I think they're referring to illegal immigrant.
Oh, illegal?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's like, what? So how did the school district job come up?
I was at a New Year's Eve party, and I was talking to this guy. He had a T-shirt on with a Corvette on it, and I used to have a Corvette. It belonged to a Corvette club, and so I went up and started talking to him, and he asked me what I did, and I told him what I did in the Army, and he says, "Wow," he said, "that sounds like what I do." And I said, "Well, what do you do?" And he says, "Well, I'm the transportation director at the Edmonds School District." We got talking, and he goes, "You know what? I went into the office yesterday, and there was a flyer for, that they're looking for a transportation officer at the Issaquah School District." And I said, "Oh, okay." So when he went home, he got the flyer. I went and picked it up. Gave me all the information I needed to know. I put my resume together. I had my resume together, but I kind of tweaked it a little bit to emphasize the transportation part, and I sent it in. Issaquah School District called me and said, "Hey, come and interview." And I was scared to death. I show up for the interview, and the HR director is there, and he meets me, and he talks to me, and he tells me, he says, "There's going to be a panel in this interview." And he says, there's 13 people on this panel. And I go, wow. And that was okay, because in the police department, when I went to the police department, they had a panel too of about maybe 8 guys. But 13, I thought, okay. And then he says that we have 14 candidates that we're interviewing. And I go, oh, I'm not going to get this job. So we're in the interview, and I'm sweating like I'll get out. I'm glad I have a suit jacket on, because my shirt was probably soaking wet. And they take turns asking me questions. And there were 2 parents. There were some executives, in the school district, and a maintenance guy, and a union. There was a union rep from the union, and they were all taking turns. And I thought I did pretty well until the union guy says, "In the Army, you didn't have any unions, so tell me how you're going to deal with a union as a civilian." And I thought, okay, I don't know how to answer that. So basically, I paused for a while, and I answered the question. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I thought, when I walked out of that interview, I thought, there's no way.
I mean, if you've never been in that situation, it's like, I'll have to figure it out when I get to that point.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But it was a situation where, okay, I have an appointment for the Seattle Police Department, Police Academy. So if this job doesn't pan out, I've still got a job. I'd been out, for almost 3 months now, and it was was getting a little desperate, I think.
Were you? I mean, you probably weren't too stressed because you're already getting a pension, right?
Yeah, I was getting
So
paid.
that's nice.
Yeah,
That's like you're not starting at zero. Obviously,
yeah,
you're not making a ridiculous amount of money, but you're making enough where you're not living on the streets.
yeah. And my wife had a job, so she was kind of frustrated that it was taking me this long.
3 months. I mean, it takes time to decompress from the military,
Yeah, it does.
right? Just even when I got out, it took me a while, probably years before I fully was able to fully decompress and not judge everyone because of whatever standard and
Yeah,
well you couldn't do that and so 3 months is not it's pretty short.
yeah. Well, I got the job. Well, actually, I got called back for a second interview. There were three finalists, and I was interview with the superintendent. And the superintendent asked me a couple of questions that I couldn't answer. There was a computer program that they were using to do their routing, and she said, "Tell me what you know about Edulog." And I says, "I have no idea what Edulog is." And I smiled, and she smiled back, and said, "Okay." And then she actually started talking to me about my leadership philosophy, and come to find out that her philosophy and my philosophy were very similar.
Mm.
So when I left that one, I felt pretty good. I was worried about not being able to understand what Edulog was, but I felt pretty good about the interview. And when they called me on a Friday night. My boss was leaving town, and he called me about 8 o'clock that night and offered me the job. And Monday, I was supposed to report to the police academy. So during that police system there, I had a sponsor that kind of walked me through that. It was a sergeant that. So I called the sergeant up and I said, "Hey, I'm not going to report on Saturday or Monday." "What do you mean you're not going to report?" "Oh man, you're the kind of police officer we want, And he tried to talk me into. And I said, "No," I said, I need to do this." So anyway, I went to work for the Issaquah School District as their transportation director.
How long did you do that for?
I did that for a year and a half, and then my
Was
boss.
that weird transitioning back to civilians, working with civilians?
It was easier than I thought it was, and working with the union was easier than I thought it was going to be. And I think the union felt that I was better than what they thought they were expecting. They were expecting a hard charging military guy, that was going to come in, and take charge and typical.
So right off the bat, you already had people under you?
Yeah, I had, well, I had probably, I had a maintenance supervisor. I had two dispatchers. I had an assistant director. I had a router. And then I had about 120 bus drivers.
Mm.
And that transition was actually easier than I thought it was.
Did you ever drive a bus?
I tried to. Honestly, I could have, but it was one of those situations where I wanted the bus drivers to feel like, that was a skill that they mastered, that their boss just couldn't. When they did driver training rodeos, I would get out there and drive the bus.
Yeah.
And I was nervous, and I'd run over cones and what have you. And so I realized that I probably ought to stay out of the bus. The last thing I wanted to do is to drive a bus and get in an accident and then, be the laughing stock of the organization. But I was the director there, and then my boss left. I was the transportation director for a year and a half, two and a half years, excuse me. And my boss left, and the superintendent came down and asked me if I wanted to have his job. And I said, yeah.
So now you're early 50s.
No, I'm still, early 50s, yeah. And so I became the executive director of operations, and I was in charge of the transportation department, the maintenance department, the custodial department, the food service department, safety and security. And I had all those directors that reported to me.
So when you're in a position like that, when you uh, aren't as skilled in all those different areas, how do you become more knowledgeable? Or do you trust the people who are head departments to do their job? How do you spot check them? How do you make sure that they respect you? Because if I'm lower ranking in that one of those departments and I see someone in there, I'm like, man, that guy doesn't know what he's doing. He hasn't done what I've done. How do you combat that or reassure them I have your best interest at heart, even though I've never done what you've done?
Um, I'll go back to the kicking rocks in the motor pool. I would walk around and, whenever I was in a building to see a principal, I would always look up the custodian. And when I was in a building to see a principal or to deal with an issue, if there was a maintenance guy there doing maintenance, I'd go see what they were doing. When they had their crew meetings, I was there listening. I wasn't participating; I was listening. Because they were all union. I would deal with. We had monthly labor management meetings, and I participated in those and listened to the issues that they had. And there were grievances. The grievances weren't usually about how they did their job. The grievances were about how we managed them, and so that was easy for me to do. And I got to tell you that many times the manager was wrong, and if the manager was wrong, then I would back up the worker, and you know. So
So it seems like in that role, you're not necessarily telling people what to do, but you're helping resolve conflicts that arise.
right, and giving my managers the resources they needed to do their job. That was always an issue. And then just supporting them. I didn't tell anybody what to do.
You trusted that they knew.
Yeah.
what-
Well, I truly did trust them. They were very competent individuals, and it was easy for me to sit back and let them go.
So how long did you do that job for?
8 years.
8 years. So that brought you to 60s, early 60s, almost 60.
Late 50s. I was in the Issaquah School District a total of 10 years. And
Are you a state employee at that point?
Yes, technically.
Yeah.
I did that for 10 years. I was commuting from Bothell to Issaquah every day. And in that capacity, I had to deal with parent meetings that usually were in the evening, issues, about food service, changing this and that. I had to go to school board meetings. I had to deal with city councils. One of my jobs was getting each city to collect impact taxes for the school district. The school district we can't levy taxes. And so we had impact fees because, Sammamish, the city of Sammamish was growing quite fast. Newcastle was coming on.
With Microsoft, whatever.
Yeah, so these cities were growing and bringing people in. Well, we had to build new schools. And so we could levy impact fees, like if like this house, there was probably an impact fee, for the school so we could build a new school. And so I had to go to these city council meetings every year to get them to agree to collect our impact fees.
So let me ask you this, your opinion on this. My dad mentioned this. So he's like, I'm retired. He's in his 70s. Why do you think older people should get a discount on their taxes for their home if they're not going to use those services, especially for like schools and stuff? Do you think that's fair, or you're like, it's just a part of being a citizen in this country? You're going to pay for services that you may never use.
I believe that if we have good schools, if we have a good police department, if we have good roads, if we have a good fire department, if all of those things are good and it keeps my community functioning and people want to live in my community and I can be proud of my community, I can support that. I have been paying school taxes for 30 years.
Right.
And I haven't had kids in school. But if I ever want to sell this house, having a good school district, a good quality school district is a selling point.
Yeah. That's a good way to think about it. It's just part of being a citizen in America.
Yeah, it is.
Even if you have limited income.
It is. Now, if I were in a position where I couldn't pay those taxes, then I feel that people like that should get a break. I am capable of paying the taxes. I complain about it, but I'm certainly capable of doing it. But I have friends my age that are living on Social Security, a fixed income, that they probably ought to get a break. And I think there are some provisions in the tax code that allow them to get a break if your income is.
I think it depends what county you're in, because I don't wherever county he lives in Pennsylvania, but he's mentioned that a few times. He's like, hey, with my limited income, I'm paying for services I will never use.
I think that there should be an exception for that. I mean, I pay for the fire department, and I've owned homes for 50 years and I've never had a fire.
Correct.
So
yeah.
But I tell you what, if I do have a fire, I'd like to be here really quick.
Yeah, when I did the podcast with the lawyer, it was funny because I was like, generally when we think of lawyers and politicians, they generally aren't thought of in a positive light. And he's like, yeah, until you need a lawyer in your corner.
Yeah.
Then you're like, okay, I needed that guy.
Yeah.
And then I did a podcast with a police officer a few weeks ago. And I was like, man, the one type of officer no one likes is the traffic enforcer. And funny enough, I got pulled over on Sunday. And in Mill Creek, where that Seattle Hill Road, where it's 25 miles an hour, which is ridiculously slow.
Yeah.
He didn't give me a ticket. I don't know why. I know my driver's license says veteran on it. So maybe he looked at my record, saw nothing on my record, and saw that and decided not to give me a ticket. But I was surprised. So you worked for that school district for almost 10 years. And then how long do you have to work for the state before you can start pulling a pension?
10 years.
10 years. So that was kind of your goal going into it, knowing, hey, I got to do at least 10 years.
Yeah. But I did my 10 years and I got tired of all the night meetings. I got tired of the commute and my friend that introduced me helped me get the job in Issaquah ended up retiring in Edmonds. And so I applied for the transportation job in Edmonds. It was a cut in pay, but I felt it was worth it because of my quality of life.
Right.
It was a 15-minute, 20-minute commute. And I didn't have all the night meetings. And so it was kind of a breath of fresh air. I was burnt out, commuting and, 3 nights a week, I didn't get home till 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, that's not fun. Especially when you don't have kids in those schools.
Yeah.
Like, what am I doing?
Yeah. But, the Issaquah job was one where I had to learn really fast, coming from a military to a civilian, and then especially one where parents were directly involved and
They can get emotional.
They get emotional and irrational, I think, is probably. And I had to deal with parents, and it was like drinking out of a fire hose, trying to learn all the things I needed to do. And there, I made some mistakes there that helped me become better, and they were kind of embarrassing, but and hurt a little bit too, but I started to feel like I could accomplish just about anything. I mean, I was exposed to so many different problems that I had to solve that I was really starting to feel pretty comfortable.
So there's a thing that I try to practice in my own life is adopting frameworks. Trying to think from first principles. And it sounds like with you, you probably adopted some first principles ideas to help you deal with, because it's hard to have nuanced how am I going to deal with every situation, but if you have basic framework to operate under, then you're able to solve a lot of these issues. So I'm curious, what was those principles that you tried to follow? I use the word framework, but principles that you tried to follow to help you resolve issues in so many different categories.
Probably the one that I used most is a thing from Stephen Covey in his 7 Habits for Highly Effective People was seek first to understand. And so that's what I tried to do. If there was an issue, I would listen, and I would sit down and listen and find out what the true grievance is. A lot of times, there's kind of what appears on the surface is only part of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's things underneath that created that thing on the surface. And so if you can break through that crust on the surface and get down, into the real issue, it's easier to solve a problem. And so I didn't do a knee-jerk reaction. I tried to understand, what the grievance was, what the issue was, what is the real issue that we need to solve.
What would you do if you couldn't, whatever their demand was, you couldn't meet?
That happened a lot, especially in the Army. You have regulations that you can't violate, and then in the school district, a lot of it was state regulations and district policies that you can't let this parent get what they want because there's a state regulation and there's a district policy against it. And so you just have to, keep your feet planted and
What's some like demand that a parent would make that was just so outrageous?
um, there were a lot. Usually it dealt around the bus driver disciplining their student. And usually it was like, I'm going to kick you off the bus. You can't ride the bus anymore because of your behavior. Well, and a lot of parents, especially when they both work, if the kid can't catch the bus, then that means that it disrupts their
Right.
whole family.
This is in the 2000s, right?
Yeah.
Which is crazy because kids back then should have been a little bit more well behaved than they are today. And that goes back to parents not taking ownership of their own kids. It's always someone else's fault. Little Billy's amazing. Little Billy's not amazing.
Yeah, that was a big issue. I believe parents sent their kids to school, and it's our responsibility to get them there. It's our responsibility to teach them, so on and so forth. So we had to put cameras on the bus, so that we could, show parents
Yeah,
behavior.
Little Billy's not an angel.
Yeah.
There's a guy that I met at the gym, retired cop, now works as a security officer at one of these school districts. And he's like, he's probably in his 50s now. And he's like, when I was a kid, if you were the bad kid, you're done. Like no one's gonna baby you, no one's gonna like.
Yeah, that's what.
But now that he is a security officer at these schools, if you're the bad kid, now you're catered to. It's his job to now walk these kids to their different classrooms, and if the kid doesn't make it, he's in trouble. And it's
Yeah.
like whatever happened to the parents being at fault and then the child being at fault for not, like, if you clearly don't want to be there and you clearly aren't playing, then that's on you. That's not the school's problem. That's not his problem. It's on you. And so yeah, it's sad where things have become, because it's not, no one's taking ownership of themselves or their child.
Yeah. Well, it is an issue. And my job as a transportation director in those situations was training my bus drivers to understand things. You know, one of the things we used to train our bus drivers, you know, what's the real issue? You know, kids are supposed to sit down in the bus, you know, and but there are kids that will, you know, not sit down, and the bus driver gets frustrated, and I want to kick this kid off the bus. And so I'm reviewing the film with the bus driver, and you know, the kid sits in his seat, and then when the bus stops, then he moves to a different seat. And so I'll ask the bus driver, okay, the bus isn't moving. It stopped, and he just moved from one seat to another. What's unsafe about that? Well, he just bothers me. You know, that's what they'll say. Because I tell him to sit down and he doesn't do it. And I'm saying, yeah, but, you know, pick your battles. You know, how much energy are you putting into this kid? What he's doing isn't unsafe. Yes, I know it bugs you, but, you know, pick your battles. And
The funny thing about school buses, we're all about child safety.
yeah.
Right? When you're in a car, you got to wear a seatbelt.
Mhm.
A bus is full of kids, no seatbelts. That's one thing I haven't figured out yet, is for all about child safety, a school bus, which has a lot of school kids in it,
Yeah.
is the one place you don't even have to have a seatbelt.
Well, I think that's going to change. The way the bus seats were designed, they're designed to, you know, to basically be a safe impact place, you know.
You just run into the seat in front of you.
Yeah, basically.
But yeah, that's always been funny because it's like
You know that.
we're all about child safety, but that is probably one of the not safest places for
Well, you know,
an accident.
there are a lot of issues putting seatbelts on buses. Like, you know, does a bus driver drive if a kid doesn't have his seatbelt on? And then how does a bus driver know if a kid's got his seatbelt on or not? And then you have to have, you know, the safest seatbelt is a 3-point, you know, that has the shoulder strap. So how do you put a shoulder strap for, you know, three
I
kids
get
on a
it.
bus?
I'm not saying I'm not. I just it's more of a it's more comedic than anything that.
Well, it is an issue, and you know, and some great minds are trying to solve that. When I retired, that was one of the bigger issues, and we were on our smaller buses. We were putting seatbelts on it, and I haven't seen what the school buses have now, but you know, there are some states that are mandating seatbelts in buses, and I think Washington State. I don't know if they've mandated it now or not, but it'll be interesting to go back and see. Next time I go visit my old school district, I'll go look at a school bus and ask that question.
All right, so let's. So then you worked at Edmonds, and then you eventually
I
retired.
retired from Edmonds.
How long did you work there for?
10 years.
So you did 20 years in the school district.
Yeah.
So you're pulling 2 pensions plus Social Security. So you're doing all right.
Right. That's why I say I complain about my taxes, but I can certainly.
Your taxes are also paying you
Yeah.
in a roundabout way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know, it's interesting looking back on your life. At the beginning of it, you didn't quite know what you wanted to do. And for a lot of young people, that can be quite paralyzing. So they don't take any action. Then they're sitting in their mom's basement wondering why nothing's happening. And the more I do this, the more I see common themes in people's life, and it's like just the way you got your first job at the school district was something you didn't plan. You met because you were out and about. You met someone who then introduced you to this job, which then you got. And that's one thing I try to make a point to younger people is you still have to live life, because in the living of life you will then have you'll meet things that you didn't plan or experience that then lead you to your next point, right? And even how you got back into the military, and all these different things that yes, we want to plan, we want to do all those things, but you also have to plan for the unplanned events, because that's a lot of times that big things can change and happen that way. So it's interesting seeing that occur in your life. Um, a question I like to ask people is, this podcast is called The Game of Life. And if you can, the game of life, and if you can summarize, whether in a sentence, a phrase, a paragraph, but life is dot dot dot.
Because I've had such an eclectic background, I think that to me, life is one adventure after another, and but you've got to look for the adventure. You summed it up better than I could, I think, about being visible, or being in the right place at the right time to take advantage of the situation. There's a adage, I think, it says success is, being at the right place at the right time and taking advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed a lot of people that have, very few of them have a direct path and they stick to that path 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time they're doing things, and then something will happen, and they'll ricochet off of their path and head down another path. That's a good question, and I'm not sure I'm competent enough to answer it.
No, it's not. I don't always ask that question to people because it is a tough one to answer if you haven't thought through it. But I think that's a good answer. Well, there's no wrong answer.
Yeah.
One thing I enjoy talking to older men is life is less theoretical because you've lived life. Because when you talk to guys in their 20s and 30s, it's all about theory. It's all about, I think you should do this. This is how you should do this. But once you've gotten older in life, it's like, this is how my life was. I'm not saying it's the best way or the right way or the only way, but this was my life experience. And so one thing younger guys, especially younger successful guys, they're always talking about, when I'm older and I'm retired, I'm going to be sitting in my rocking chair thinking back on my life. Is that something you do? Do you think back a lot on your past experiences? Are you more just so living in the moment and not so concerned about reliving every decision that you made in the past?
I don't do a lot of reminiscing to bring back my old glory. I'm more worried about, what am I going to do tomorrow? I'm still learning. I'm thinking about, going to a VOTEC school and learning a few skills that I've always wanted to learn but never had the time. Now I have the time. What's stopping me from doing that is I'm traveling so much, that if I get into a program, am I going to be able to, to do it? And then another, I guess, thing that's holding me back is that if I get that skill, where am I going to use it? I'd like to learn how to weld.
Yeah.
And I worked my way through college painting cars because I was in the body shop business. But there's new paints with new technology, new paint guns. I'd like to go learn how to do that painting. But again, if I learn that skill, where am I going to use it? Am I going to go to work for somebody? I don't have a paint booth in my house,
Yeah.
but it's a skill I'd like to learn, and maybe I'll just bite the bullet and go learn it, and I may never use it again, but I have a hobby car. I have an older car that I want to repaint, and maybe I'll just paint it, if I learn how to do it.
Mm. Um, as you think back on where your life is and where it is now, I guess you kind of already alluded to it. It's for you. It's you. Now that you're in your 70s, you're still thinking about the future, and you're still wanting to grow and learn. Um, I guess where do you see your future as? Because when you're young, it's always about growth mindset. But at a certain point, does that change a little bit, or is it more?
Well, it's changed for me. You mentioned it. I have two pensions plus Social Security, so you know, gaining monetarily is not something that I have any interest in.
Yeah.
Um, I do have an interest in preserving what I've got, and I think my wife worries about that more than I do because, I think she sees herself living beyond me, and
That's statistically
yeah,
common.
that's probably going to happen. I mean, she comes from a healthy stock, but so what I want to do is that I want to build relationships, and I like you having this podcast. What I do is there's some older guys that I know they're retired, and I want to, hey, let's get together, twice a month and share experiences, maybe do something. One of the guys who's really into guns, he wants to take us out and to the range and do some shooting. That sounds fun. Mm-hmm. I used to do that all the time for a living, Some of the other guys are a little hesitant, but yeah, let's do that. And I'd like to get a bunch of guys and go to a Mariners game or something like that. We'd like to go to a Seahawks game, but it's too expensive. But a Mariners game, you can get $20 tickets.
Yeah.
And we can get a bunch of guys and do that. Car clubs, I'm into cars, and I'd like to be able to. I would love to be able to get another hobby car, that needs some work and do those kinds of things. So, I have a lot of things that I want to do. I want to do more traveling. So, I'm having a lot of fun. My life has been fun. Even the bad times, when I reflect on them, it wasn't that bad, I was having fun. So I just look at life as an adventure. And so I try to make it as adventurous as I can.
I think you're more than twice my age at this point. What's advice you would give to your 35-year-old self that I could potentially start implementing in my life? Or what's knowledge that you've picked up later on in life? I don't like to ask questions if people have regret, but what's knowledge that you learned later in life where you're like, man, that would have been extremely helpful to have implemented earlier?
I think education is important. That doesn't always mean college. It means a lot of things. There's a lot of things that we can be educated in. And I'd also say that you need to take care of your health, develop habits that are healthy so that when you get to be my age, it's easier to stay on those good habits.
Have you lost peers that didn't take care of their health?
Yes, quite a few.
And like one of the themes of this channel is health and fitness. I mean, I met you at a gym, and I think about that a lot. Health and fitness, not in a worrisome way, but I think the reason why people don't take it serious enough is that when they are relatively healthy, or if they're having unhealthy habits, they don't get instant feedback, right? If you make poor, unhealthy decisions, let's say you eat 10 donuts that day. Tomorrow, you're not necessarily going to feel sicker or worse. But if you do that for 10 years, that's when you start feeling that impact.
Yeah.
And so, how do we get people to take that more serious? For your friends that didn't, you know, they either had disease or death.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how do we impress upon people that this is something worthwhile to be concerned about? Because I'm sure you talked to some of your friends that came down with the disease, and I'm curious what their thoughts were at that point, where they're like, "Oh man, I probably could have prevented this, or I didn't have to have this." I'm curious if you had those.
Well, diabetes is the biggest threat to people my age. High blood pressure is another one, and so they get high blood pressure, and then it affects their kidneys, and and they can have strokes. But diabetes seems to be the one that plagues most of my friends. And how do we do that? When you're invincible at 35, it is hard to do that. And maybe the way to do that is just to do what you're doing, and that's to have older people like me tell them that.
Yeah, and that's essentially what I'm trying to do is I hate, how people, I just want to bring awareness to the situation, but it's like it is an issue whether you think it's not going to be. And I'm as I'm getting older, it's like I'm seeing men in their late 30s into their 40s that are having unhealthy habits, and they don't feel the effects today, but it's like, just wait till you hit 50. It's going to come hard, it's going to come fast.
Yeah, it will.
And then you're going to wonder, why did this happen? And it's like, well, just like everything in life, if it's not improving, it's degrading, and your body is consistently, I don't know if degrading is correct, or it's just wear and tear, and something will click one day, and then it's this domino effect, and it's like you can delay that process if you're deliberate about it when you're younger, but most people, they usually wait till it's too late, and now they have all these health issues.
Yeah, they do. I'm 40 pounds heavier than I was 5 years ago because I had an accident and was in a wheelchair and couldn't stay active. Now I'm trying to lose that. It's tough because I developed habits when I was active. When I was running a lot, I ate a lot. But when you're in a wheelchair and you have those old habits of,
Did they say you weren't going to walk again?
Yeah, they did.
Wow.
Well, they didn't say that. I believed that. A lot of people believe that. When I had an accident in China and I shattered both my ankles, and when I came back after the Chinese put me back together, and they did a pretty good job. The surgeon that I saw when I first got off, he said, "Oh, the Chinese were very heroic in putting you back together. If that had happened here, depending upon where you were in the United States, they may have amputated your legs because you have a 97% chance that those bones won't heal." And that's what happened. They didn't heal. And so I had to have another discussion with some other guys. I gotta go to the bathroom.
Yeah. Okay, few bonus questions. How do you stay married for 50 years? 50 plus.
51 this month.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I have to kind of say that my wife is probably more responsible about that than I am, in that she truly loves people and she loves me and wants to
Do you
support
think
me.
Chinese culture, I don't know, but are they divorce not as a big thing over there? They're a lot more loyal in that culture.
No,
So that
almost every one of her friends is divorced.
okay, so that
I think that's unique to my wife. And
Because I mean, you took her different countries, long
Right.
distance,
Right.
long hours.
Yep.
A lot of these strains would have been difficult. I mean, we already know divorce, 50% of normal marriages are get divorced. Military, they don't
Yeah.
even release numbers on that.
Yeah. You know, patience, I think, is, and forgiveness, I think, are key characteristics
Has it
of
gotten
our.
easier over the years to get along?
Yes. In
Because I
fact,
talk to some people, they say no, but I'm like, there's got to be a point where that you hit a point where it's like it has to be easier. And maybe those people that say no have only been married 20 years. Well, once you hit year 30, it gets easier.
it is easy, and quite frankly, imagine, I can't imagine my life without my wife. Um, sometimes when I sit down and have a moment to reflect, um, you know, it'll bring me to tears thinking about, the support that she's given me and what have you. So, and I don't know, we just don't, we can kind of anticipate each other now. We're at the point now, I'm thinking something and I'll make a suggestion and she goes, "Oh, I was just going to say that." And then she does the same thing, she'll say, "Craig, I think we ought to do this." And I'm going, "Oh man, I was just thinking about that."
Do you guys still have conflict?
Yes, we do.
But
And
is
it's,
that
it's
conflict so
petty.
minimal that it
Yeah,
doesn't get to you? Because I think that's the struggle a lot of marriages have is they have conflict is a natural part of life. It's how you deal with that conflict.
yeah.
I'm assuming as you've been married for 50 years, when you have conflict, it's not going to blow up, or do you have a framework to operate with that conflict, or
I think we do. And she does the same as I do. It's just that we swallow our pride and compromise to the point where, I don't have to be right all the time. What's so important about being, having it my way? And so, both of us do that. And she does a better job of that than I do. Um, she'll say, "Okay, Craig, we'll do it your way," more than I say, "Okay, Barb, we'll do it your way." But, the conflict is kind of petty. Little things like, we'll be driving in the car and she'll say, "Oh, I want to go to this place and get a pastry." This is something that happened just recently. I say, "Okay." Well, in my mind, there are 4 ways we can get to that pastry place. In her mind, there's one way to get there. And I didn't pick the one way. And so I turn this way and she says, "Oh, I guess we're not going to go to the pastry store." And I say, "Yeah, we are, Barb, but we can get there this way." And I could tell that she believed that I had forgotten that she wanted to get a pastry. And so there was a little disagreement in the car. And I said, "Barb, I'll show you." And I drive right to it, on the route that I was on. And by that time she goes, "Well, I don't need a pastry anyway."
So little stuff like that still does happen.
It happens.
Because I'm hoping, I'm married 13 years. My hope and dream is that stuff doesn't. I just hope that stuff goes away. Is my pipe dream, but I don't know. I guess it doesn't.
It
It's
doesn't go
more how
away.
you handle it.
It's how you handle it. And, but you know what? Half hour later, it was
You joke
ancient
about it.
history.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that big a deal.
Um, we kind of hinted towards this subject earlier, but there's just China-U.S. relationship. It's in the news a lot. You've been to both countries. You've lived. I don't know how long you've lived in China, but you've experienced both cultures.
Yeah.
Is it one that we should be more concerned about, or I guess what is your take on it, being that you're married to one and you've also lived in China?
I think that China is going to be a problem. The people of China are very much like us. They go about their business. They've been able to start businesses. They can be entrepreneurs. They can do things. Most of the Chinese I know are very ambitious and are doing all kinds of things. But I believe that the leadership in China is an issue, and they got to be leaders because they're strong personalities, and it's a problem. China has to save face, and that is a big deal in the Chinese culture, saving face. My wife does that. All my in-laws do that. They've got to save face. They've got to put on a, kind of I'm in charge kind of a mentality. And the leaders of China are doing that, and so I think it's going to be a problem. The Taiwan thing is a thorn in their side. They've got to save face by bringing Taiwan into the realm of the Communist Party, just like they did with Hong Kong and Macau. So, yeah, they're the big bad wolf.
Yeah, and I think for the U.S. citizen, it's separating the people from the government, right?
Yep.
And it's just like in the U.S., whether you're left or right, it's separating the people in power from just the everyday average citizen. And is everyone in China bad? No. But is that government a type of rule that we want around the whole world? Maybe, maybe not. Versus U.S. democracy. But would you say, I mean, your wife's lived in America
Most of her
life now. Is she pro-America, pro-China, or does she love both countries equally?
I think she's pro-America, and she's kind of worried that China, the big bad wolf's going to, create issues. But Chinese are proud people, and if we treat them less than in a dignified manner, they're going to get upset. Now, how do you deal with that? I don't know. When I go to China, I actually feel safer in China than I do in the United States.
Yeah, I was talking to a guy in the sauna who's Chinese, and he was just like, all these cameras, it's one of the safest countries in the world now.
Yeah.
Because crime's not an issue because people get destroyed.
Well, people don't have guns. They're just busy working and trying to make a living, and they take care of poorer people better than we do. But seriously, when I go to China, I'm kind of surprised at how you have these new cities like Shenzhen, which I go there and it puts any of our big cities to shame. The streets are clean. Taxis are all EVs. All the delivery vehicles are EVs. Or you don't feel the exhaust smoke and all that stuff. And the subway works well. They take care of people. If you're a senior, you can get on a subway and go anywhere for free. The shops are modern and people are working hard. And then you go to the smaller villages where I really like to go, and people are just paying attention to living their days. They don't care about politics. They don't care about what America's doing.
Right.
So, and I prefer being in the smaller towns, but there are some restrictions, and civil rights are an issue. My wife talks about it all the time, that people that she mentioned that a guy spit on the Chinese flag, and he was arrested, put in jail. And it's,
Safety comes at a price.
Yep.
Right? It's what are you willing to give up? And I don't think those people necessarily had a choice of what they're willing to give up. And that's something we have to think through as a U.S. nation is we say we want this, but then it comes with these unintended consequences that China has been willing to pay for. But are we willing to do the same? But yeah, that is interesting to think through because, like you said, they're not going away.
Yeah.
Is there any last thoughts or questions I didn't ask you that you think about now? Did you answer the one where you said, "Oh, what is something you learned later on in life that you could have or wish you would have applied earlier or understood?"
Well, I mentioned health.
Oh yeah.
And I'd also say, you need to start putting away for the time when you get to my age. I see a lot of young people that haven't done that or don't do that because it'll be very critical when they get to be my age. But I also think that you need to seek first to understand what's going on. I see so many people that get angry about politics or my opinion, your opinion, and they get kind of ingrained in, I'm right, you're wrong kind of a mentality. And I'd say that, don't do that. What makes America great is the fact that we have the diversity that we have in our society of ideas and cultures and feelings. So I believe that as a young person, if this country is going to hold together, we need to, be more understanding of differences.
Mm.
And then I'd say that you need to be actively engaged in a good cause, doing something. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does. I always just like hearing people's thoughts and experience. And again, it's so hard to get people to think even 1 year beyond their current life, let alone 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
Because that's the health, that's the financial, it's decisions your decisions and actions you take today will affect you 20, 30 years from now.
You're right.
And it's extremely difficult to get people to think long term. Unless that's something just built into their culture or society. But I do this podcast because I think I obviously get stuff out of it, but someone may come across it and they'll get something out of it. But I also have started interviewing younger people, so someone in their 20s can be like, okay, that's what 40 looks like. Because I want to have a whole library of people from all different age groups, all different careers, so they can kind of be like, oh, okay, that's one thing that people worried about, which you shouldn't worry about, is the future. Or I don't know how that will play out. Well, then here's a story you can listen to, and this is how his life played out. Not that your life will play out exactly that way, but it removes some of the fear of the unknown, right? There's enough humans that have lived now that if you want to speed up your process of knowledge and wisdom and experience, go learn from those people that have written books, they're already dead, or people that are still alive. And I encourage young people to go engage with older people on a regular basis. It's healthy, it's good, because it keeps you grounded, it keeps you giving different perspective on your life. And so I've been able to do that just on the few that I've done, and I look forward to doing that more. And one thing that you mentioned is you have friends that you go do stuff with. I would love for you to, if you're open to it, let them know about this opportunity, because I'd love to meet them, and if they're willing to talk about their life, that'd be a lot of fun to hear their journey, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I'll ask him.
So, I know it's, I get a lot of no's from people when I ask them, which is understandable
Yeah,
because it's hard to
scary.
put
Scary.
put yourself out there. And, but I think, this will have impact on me, but also, other people that may come across your story. So really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for your service, both in,
Thanks. Yeah.
in the military and in the school district, because those are both critical components of a good society. There's more we could talk about in the school district, but I think we'll put that to bed for now.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet.